Gotta have that. Mayor Jacobs.
I'm here.
Committeeman Hickey.
Here.
Ms. Orabana.
Here.
Mr. Leonard.
Here.
Mr. Rodelius.
Here.
Mr. DiGiovanni.
Here.
Mr. Walter.
Here.
Chairwoman Gutschall.
Here.
Adequate notice of this meeting of the Bedminster Township Land Use Board was filed with the Township Clerk, sent to the Bernardsville News and the Courier News and to all subscribers, and posted at the Township Municipal Building, 1 Miller Lane, Bedminster, New Jersey, on January 6, 2023.
Please stand.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'll open it up to the public for anyone that might be here for anything that is not on the agenda tonight. Both on the Zoom and on public. Seeing no one, and we'll close this portion. Okay, we have minutes to approve on September 14th. Got a chance to look at the minutes, please? Please make a motion.
I make a motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Anyone have to recuse themselves? No? Okay, we're good.
Excuse me, do we have to do the closed session separately?
Okay. Okay. Oh, I didn't know, okay, I see what you said. Okay, so we have a executive closed meeting that we need to approve as well. So I can hear a motion.
I'll make the motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Yes. Minutes are approved. Okay. Correspondence to,
Madam Chairman, on the one KRE Bed 1,
yes,
that's a request for an extension
yes.
of their statutory protection period until for 1 year, and I recommend it to you if you would be willing to do it. They're still working on the governmental approvals and cooperation with the county and state. If you would be willing to do it, it'd be a motion to approve the 1 year extension for SK Bed 1 as requested by their attorney, Lawrence Costello. Is there such a motion?
Motion.
I'll second.
Second, and a roll call, please. It can be anybody, except on this one, yeah, this was everybody, I think.
Mayor Jacobs?
I just do want to point out that the, is that the letter from Frank Petrino?
No, this is the letter from Larry Costello for Bed 1, just asking for a 1 year extension.
Okay, the Bed 1, not the Bed, okay, got it. Aye.
Committeeman Hickey.
Aye.
Ms. Orabana.
Aye.
Mr. Leonard.
Aye.
Mr. Rodelius.
Aye.
Mr. DiGiovanni.
Aye.
Mr. Walter.
Aye.
Chairwoman Gutschall.
Aye.
Okay,
Okay, motion's approved.
that's all I had, Madam Chairman.
Okay. We are going to skip around on the agenda a little bit, and we're going to go to, oh, you want to do determination of completeness first, Paul?
Probably, yeah.
Okay, why don't we do that?
First one is for Bed 2 Advanced. I wrote a completeness letter dated September 30th, where I recommended that the application be deemed complete, subject to the waivers identified. The other information has been submitted, so it's my recommendation that you deem the application.
That the board would entertain its motion to deem the application complete and waive the remaining items for completeness as recommended by Mr. Ferrero. Is there such a motion?
So moved. Second.
Oh, wait a minute, now, George, you're going to recuse on.
Oh, that's right,
Bed
sorry,
1
sorry.
complete, Bed 2.
Then I'll make the motion.
So.
And I'll
okay.
second.
You are recused on Bed 2.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Roll call? Roll call. Mayor Jacobs?
Aye.
Mayor Hickey?
Aye.
Ms. Urbana?
Aye.
Mr. Leonard?
Aye.
Mr. Rodriguez, Mr. DeGiovanni?
Aye.
Mr. Walter?
Aye.
Chairwoman Gotcha.
Aye.
Next, we have Crossroads for Hope, with the completeness letter on September 24th, 2023. There were a number of waivers requested based on the de minimis nature of the application. It's recommended that the waivers be granted and the application be deemed complete.
So if the board would entertain that, that's a motion to waive the remaining items for completeness and deem the application of Crossroads for Hope to be complete. Is there such a motion?
I'll make the motion.
Second.
Roll call.
Skip us.
Yep.
Skip
Ms. Urbana?
Aye.
Mr. Leonard?
Aye.
Mr. Rodriguez?
Aye.
Mr. DeGiovanni?
Aye.
Mr. Walter?
Aye.
Chairwoman Gotcha.
Aye. Okay, we're going to skip now and go to the application for Crossroads. Want to come up? Got it.
The Board of Adjustment.
And I'll
I'm
see
gonna
you guys
put
in a
this
little-
down.
We'll see you in a little
So
while.
it doesn't fall and break during the excitement of your hearing.
Hi, good evening.
So which is this?
Okay, so I'm going to start off just for a half second because I'm thrust in the role I am normally doing what Carly's doing tonight because of the absence of our senior management at Crossroads, because I am a trustee, because I've been a trustee for 13 or 14 years, because I am on the executive committee, and because I've been their counsel for 15 years. Tonight, I am their witness. I'll introduce you to a very bright young associate from our law firm, Carly Clinton, who will be taking us through this quickly.
Hi, good evening, members of the board, professionals, and staff. My name is Carly Clinton, and I'm from Skang, Price, Smith & King, and our firm represents the applicant Crossroads for Hope and application number 2023-004 before you this evening. This application is for an amended and preliminary and final site plan approval. Some of you may remember we were before the board a few years ago and received approval and have some minor changes to the site plan. The subject property consists of lot 6.01, block 57, located on 3 Crossroads Drive in Bedminster Township. It's situated in the township's ORV zone. With me this evening is Michael K. Mullen, who just introduced you to the board, and I'd like to have Michael just give some background and just a quick brief overview as to what has changed and what we're seeking tonight.
Michael, I'll just have you swear to tell the truth.
true. I swear.
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you God?
I do.
Thank you, Michael, and please go ahead.
Okay.
Well, he's appearing as a witness tonight.
Right. So just
I would trust him either way,
Yeah.
everybody.
For the purpose of the record, I am an attorney at law for the state of New Jersey. My license is in good form. I am also a senior partner at Skang, Price, King, and I have been involved in the prior applications concerning what used to be known as the wellness community, which then became known as the cancer support community of central New Jersey, and now is known as Crossroads for Hope. During that time, important to remember, it always was the same 501c3 entity. So while our affiliations may have changed, we've always been an independent entity, complete with a ghost that runs around the halls at night in the main farmhouse building. So what did we do? We took an old barn, came before you guys, we took an old barn after subdividing the property off of what I call the large stretch of property there. And then we used it as a multi-purpose room, mostly for people relating to cancer activities, whether it be people affected by cancer, or we do an awful lot of counseling and other activities for families affected by cancer, including children. So we did the first barn. It was terrific. You guys were terrific. We kept a design sort of similar to what had been there. Being a former resident of Bedminster, living off of Burt Mills Road, I was very sensitive to that. And so that project went fine. We then did a second barn. And again, the board was terrific with us and allowed us to move forward with respect to the second barn. During the course of that second barn, there were discussions with your professionals, and they had some excellent points. They kind of wondered, gee, why don't you keep the first barn? Why don't you make that your kitchen area? We do a big thing, nutrition related activities with respect to cancer for families and for cancer victims themselves. But at that point in time, because of donor relationships and the like, we couldn't make that switch. So why are we here tonight? Because we should have made the switch back then. And now, as a result, all we need to do is flip what was going to be in barn 1 into barn 2. But in doing that, folks, what we have to do is there is a different type of, there's more activity in the basement of the yet to be built second barn. And as that particular activity forecasted for that area has a lot to do with kids, we needed to expand or do a better job on the second egress. And in so doing, we needed to have a certain degree of if the stairwell had to be slightly expanded, you needed to have obviously rungs to go up the area, and that then necessitated a visit to the Historical Society, who said, oh, while you're doing that, could you do some little architectural touch-ups with respect to what was now a slightly bigger area for this second egress. And of course, we approved, we took the suggestions of the Historical Society and have incorporated them into our plans. So we go back to what do we need then? Why, what approvals do we need? Well, we need the approvals because technically where you approved us before, we need a little bit more room because this access point is on the side of the building, which had to be done because of restrictions in terms of side yards. And so we're moving, it's not good, it's like 3 feet more, and we need that extra room, and we can't take our relationships with our township for granted. And so we need to do that, and we also need to, the final relationship is we need, the Historical Society wanted us to move a wall that was a stone wall, to move it further over to the right if you were looking at this proposed new building, so that it would be more pleasing to the eye and that this expanded stairwell is less noticeable from the roadway. So that's essentially it. The mission of Crossroads remains the same. Very significantly, it has changed from an entity doing business almost exclusively in the beginning in Somerset County to a point where it does business all across the state. And in particular, in the last 5 years, we have expanded our outreach to communities, less fortunate communities, particularly Plainfield, Elizabeth, and Trenton. And so there is a need for this space. Also, COVID taught us, as it taught for the rest of the world, we need more space for the purposes of being able to communicate electronically with people. Questions?
You do know you have to go back to the historical commission. You know that, right?
At the end, when we actually do the final
Yes.
as-built or proposed as-built,
Right.
absolutely.
Yeah, right. And they have sent me a copy where they would like to talk about paint on this building as well, just so you know in
Okay.
advance. They're looking for a more historical paint color.
Okay,
Okay?
we can take care of that.
I'm sure you can.
Of course, yeah.
That's an easy one.
Right.
Right, okay. Anything from the board?
Now we have, actually, you're supposed to say this.
We also have our engineer with us who prepared the plans that you have received in your packet, Craig Sears, and he's available if anyone has any questions for him regarding his report, with his plans that he prepared.
He's the architect?
The engineer.
Oh, the engineer.
Yeah, I guess, Craig, if you would just describe the change.
Yeah, I think
The
it-
the variance change. Craig, if you would come forward and maybe bring another chair if you
No,
want. Or you could say where the prior witness sat. Craig, please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you God?
I do.
And please state your name and address and spell your last name.
Craig Stiers, 43 West High Street, Somerville. My last name is Stires.
Craig, you're still licensed as a professional engineer?
Yes, I am.
Any other licenses? Not that I care, but.
I do have one in Pennsylvania.
Okay.
But
And
just
so
engineering.
the board recognizes and accepts the qualifications of Craig Stiers as a professional engineer. And Craig, without a lot of detail, because we do remember this, I think if you could focus us on the relief that's being sought tonight for the variances and the degree of deviation from the prior plans.
I believe the main one was the side yard, and it was just over 8 feet, 8.3 feet, and it's going down to 7.79, so you're talking a few inches. That's different. And as Mike said, it's really at the southerly end of the building. The footprint's not really changing at all. Obviously, 3 inches, I would say it's not changing, but it's the 160 square feet of the southern end of the building is where they're putting in the stairs for the egress from the basement. So that's really the only change before you tonight from the original approval. And even the architecture is pretty much the same thing as the prior approval.
Let's just, we'll get precise. Mr. Pereira's review report of September 29th, 2023 says side yard setback changes from 8.31 feet to 7.75 feet. And the distance to the adjoining building that was previously approved at 26.26 feet will go to 26.17 feet. Is that your understanding too, Craig?
That is correct.
Okay, and then on the impervious coverage, the result of the change, there's a slight increase in impervious coverage from 24.5 to 25.25. Is that your understanding?
That is correct.
And you don't see any significant problems with that at all, do you?
No, not at all.
Okay. I think we have enough, but we should open to the public now, Jim.
Just board, any questions? No, you're good? We'll open it up to the public. Do you have any questions about this?
Questions or comments about the Crossroads for Hope amended preliminary and final site plan and amended variance application? Anybody, Janine?
No, if anyone online, if you wanted to raise your hand or unmute yourself, if you had a question regarding the Crossroads for Hope application. No, I didn't see anyone.
No, doesn't appear to be, so we'll close it to the public.
Okay, so if the board is ready, it's a motion to approve the amended preliminary and final site plan and D variances, C variances as described this evening. And with the conditions that they'll comply with Paul and Frank's reports and obtain Historic Preservation Commission review and approval of the final revisions, including the paint color as requested by the Historic Preservation Commission. Is there
Historical approval.
historical approval? Is there This approval will be effective this evening, so the applicant can proceed effective immediately, subject to the conditions that we just talked about. Is there such a motion?
Motion to approve. Second.
And a roll call.
Ms. Ormond?
Aye.
Mr. Leonard?
Aye.
Mr. Legilius?
Aye.
Mr. DeGenini?
Aye.
Mr. Walter?
Aye.
Chairwoman Gotcha.
Aye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you and
You're
good luck.
welcome.
Very much.
Yeah.
I will find the stragglers.
I just texted them, but
Oh, you did? Okay. Bring them back. No, just a minute. So you can, while we're getting ready for Bedminster to advance, you can come up, we're just waiting for our two board members to come back in. See you later. That was quick.
thank you for coming.
That was quick. No, not advance. No.
Am I there for you?
In a second, we were trying not to.
I can't walk.
I can't.
This is running. And I'm not doing the sharing anymore at that part, because we're trying to stay on top of it.
That's not a stand, those are just like bookends.
Just put it in front of you, hold it.
Maybe we'll get you a lanyard.
Don't encourage him.
We can hang it around his neck.
Yeah, we can get a chain.
I think Janine is gonna knit you a holder for it.
Well, we do have a court reporter, we all know what that means, people. A whole minute.
Okay, are we ready?
Are you still trying to log on? Okay, there you are again.
Oh, you ready? You ready? Yes, okay. Dean, you ready?
I am, I'm just gonna share when they tell me that they're ready. You ready for me to?
I'm all ready.
He's ready, you're ready, everybody's ready.
Just tell me when we're all set. Good weekend.
You should be all ready to go.
Okay, good evening, Madam Chair, Mr. Mayor, members of the board, board professionals, and the public. My name is John Inglesino. I'm a partner with the law firm of Inglesino Taylor, located in Parsippany. And I'm here tonight representing the applicant, Bedminster 2 Funding LLC, an affiliate of the Advance Group, located right here in Bedminster. The property which is the subject of this application is Lot 12 in Block 33 on the tax map of Bedminster, New Jersey, also known as 1400 through 1430 Bedminster. The subject property is located in the ORV zoning district
The applicant is seeking preliminary and final major site plan approval with variance relief for one office building of approximately 30,656 square feet. The applicant also seeks preliminary and final site plan approval for four retail professional buildings of approximately 18,280 square feet in the aggregate. All of the foregoing will be constructed with associated parking, landscaping, stormwater management, and other improvements. The applicant has executed a lease with a publicly traded pet food company. It's traded on the NASDAQ, and this will be its international headquarters. The applicant does not have tenants for the professional retail buildings at this time. As you will hear momentarily, the applicant is seeking to phase the project. Phase 1 would be the pet food company building, and phase 2 would be the retail professional buildings. The reason for the phasing for the project is that there are state permits required for the professional retail component that are not required for the office building where the pet food company will be tenanted. In order to comply with the terms of the lease and deliver the building in a timely fashion for the pet food company, the applicant will need to obtain building permits and commence construction of the pet food building before outside agency permits are obtained for the retail professional component. And if the board does approve this project, we would respectfully request that the resolution account for the phasing as I've just described, so that the applicant can obtain the building permit for the pet food building before the additional permits needed for the professional retail component of the project are obtained. We are seeking some variances, which will be described by the project engineer. We have 4 witnesses in connection with this application. Robert Michello of Gladstone Design, Inc. is the project engineer. Craig Paragoy of Dynamic Engineering is the project's traffic consultant. Nancy Doherty of Studio 1200 LLC is the project architect, and John McDonough is the planner. And without any further ado, Madam Chair, I'd like to call my first witness, Mr. Michello.
Thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Michello, please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you God?
I do.
And please state your name and address and spell your last name.
Sure, it's Robert Moscello, Moschello, and my business address is 265 Main Street, Gladstone, New Jersey.
Mr. Michello, if you can just provide your educational background, professional background, and any licenses that you hold for the board that can qualify you as a witness.
We could skip that if you want, because the board has heard it before, and we recognize it. And we're getting kind of sick of it, so. But we appreciate you being here. But we recognize and accept Rob Michello's qualifications as a professional engineer.
So, Mr. Michello, if you'd be kind enough to describe the engineering aspects of the project.
Excellent. So if I can join on the computer, please, I can share my screen. Excellent. So it's already perfect. All right, how should we, Tom, as we go along, should we do these A1, A2, A3 as I bring them up, and then we'll just give you copies later on?
That's
You
fine.
have, how many exhibits?
I have 9.
We have 9 exhibits.
9 exhibits. If they're not marked yet, then you can mark them all, A1 and through A9, and then just go run right through them.
Okay, all right, so I'll just run through I'll just mark them really quick for the record here. Starting with A1, this is the neighborhood aerial exhibit dated October 12th, 2023. A2 will be the site aerial / environmental constraints exhibit dated October 12th, 2023. A3 will be site plan rendering dated October 12th, 2023. A4 will be phasing exhibit dated October 12th, 2023. A5 will be banked parking exhibit dated October 12th, 2023. A6 will be grading and utility exhibit, also dated October 12th, 2023. A7 is lighting exhibit dated October 12th, 2023. A8 is a signage exhibit dated October 12th, 2023. And A9 is project variance exhibit, also dated October 12th, 2023. And I have all these electronically on the screen. I'll put them up as I go through them, and I would probably be jumping back and forth to a few of them as I go through here. So I'll try to remember to mention the exhibits as I pull them up on the screen. Okay, so starting off first, I have exhibit A1, which is the neighborhood aerial exhibit. Just going to use this to basically kind of orient everybody to the site, to kind of describe the surrounding environs of the property. So north being to the upper left on the plan. If you can see my pointer, it's just north is up to the upper left on the plan. The property here is outlined in yellow. It's block 33, lot 12. It's 15.077 acres. It's within your ORV zone. As you can see, it's surrounded by the existing development. You have Route 206 to the west of the property here on the bottom of the page, going in north-south direction. You have Route 202 or Somerville Road going in a northern direction here to on the eastern side of the property. And then you have on the northern side, you have Lamington Road or County Route 523, basically creating what this triangle-shaped area here that the property is situated in the middle of. And as you can see, as I mentioned, we're in the ORV zone. It's both our property and the northern property with lot 12.01 is also in the ORV zone. And then the surrounding zones, we have the VN zone to the north and to the east. We have the VN2 zone to the east along Somerville Road and to the south as well. Then across the highway on across 206, we have the OR zone that's to the west of the property. And then just some of the surrounding improvements. You have to the west the two existing office buildings, which is now the AT&T campus. They just moved in there just recently. To the north, I mentioned you have an undeveloped strip of land here, and then you have existing businesses and residential along 523 or Lamington Road. And then we also have existing development, both homes and commercial development along Somerville Road as well to our east, and also, of course, some residential to our south as well that surrounds the property. So what I'm going to do is going to go to my next exhibit, which is A2, which is the environmental constraints exhibit. And I'm also going to use this to talk about the existing developments that's on the property today. So starting off with the environmental, I'll start with the layout of the property first. So the property actually has two access points into the site today. There's a main access on Route 206. This is the existing signalized intersection that's there today. It was constructed back when the office building across the street and this site was built back in the late 90s, early 2000s. That's a full service signalized intersection. You'll hear more about that from my traffic engineer when he testifies, but that is our main access into the site from Route 206. We have a driveway that comes into the site. You have a series of parking areas that are on the property that service the three existing office buildings that currently total 87,560 square feet on the property, and they're referred to as 1400, which is the existing Forbes building, and then 1420, two-story office building to the north, and 1430, which is the two-story office building to the south. There is also an access drive which goes out to Route 202 Somerville Road on the eastern side of the property. That's also essentially a full-service driveway. You can make a right or left turn out of the site from that driveway onto Somerville Road. That driveway also services this existing small office complex of three office buildings, a parking lot that at one time was part of this development but has since been subdivided off, but utilizes some of the existing utilities and facilities of this site for it. In terms of the existing site itself, we have 352 parking spaces that are on the property today. As I pointed out, there's basically 4 parking fields. There's a field to the south of 1430, a parking field in front of 1400, a parking field both to the east and west of 1420 building that has all the existing parking on the site. And you'll notice this grass area where my property label is, where it says block 33, lot 12. That grass area there, if I zoom into it on the screen, this area here was actually graded out. This was actually a bank parking area that was on the original approved plans for the site. The site was actually approved with 439 parking spaces. but only 352 were built and the rest were banked as part of the original approvals. And you'll hear from our traffic engineer, but just anecdotally, the property's been, over 95% leased for some time now. And really, when you drive by the site and you look at it, the front parking areas are typically in use, especially in front of 1430 and 1400, and some of the parking by 1420, but the back parking lot gets very little use. So basically, you've got 87,000 square feet of office space, and they use about a third of the parking on the property for basically what are fully occupied buildings on site. In terms of some of the constraints, as I mentioned, it's 15 acres, the overall site. There are some wetlands on the property. We actually submitted for our LOI in August on this property to the DEP. You can see the wetlands are actually here in green. There's 3 pockets of wetlands, 2 on either side of the main entry drive, and then 1 towards the back of I'll say, the eastern property line. Those are actually isolated wetlands, as been designated by our environmental consultant. And then there's a small tip of a wetland that runs along the existing drive. It's not totally shown here because it goes off the property. That's over here by the driveway coming in to the site from Somerville Road. That's the extent of the wetlands. There are no floodplains, no riparian zones that exist on the property. There are 2 small sections of steep slopes that are on the property, both here by the detention basin and over here by the northern property line. Those slopes were the grading that occurred when the property was built in the late 90s. So they're actually man-made slopes, but they are steep slopes underneath your ordinance nonetheless, so they're shown on the plan here. In terms of the overall site stormwater management system, this property was developed in the late 90s. A detention basin was built up here in this northern portion of the site. That basin takes the majority of the runoff from the development and discharges it towards Somerville Road. So that basin was built as part of this development, as well as for this small office complex just off the property here. There are also a series of easements on the property. There's a water line easement, there's a telecom easement, there's a small conservation easement for wetlands when we did the approvals back in the late 90s. There's also a what we call an access or jug handle easement that you see here on the plan. This area outlined in blue. And this was mentioned in Mr. Ferraro's letter, that we'll have to address this easement and essentially have it vacated because it was the remnants of what originally was going to be a jug handle for access to the properties across 206 before the signalized intersection was constructed. So there's actually a reciprocal easement on the other property as well for access for us, but given the way the properties have been developed, there's no reason for a jug handle anymore. So we'll have to look at getting that addressed as part of the approval process for this portion of the site. And there's also, I mentioned, the telecom easement that comes off of 206 here, and this Bell Atlantic easement here, it's actually Verizon. Now, you can see this easement here that goes into the property. There's actually an underground vault here, and this is one of the constraints when we get to the site plan layout. When we talk about the office building, why we located it where we did was because of this underground vault that Verizon owns on the property, and we really can't move it. So it's just in the corner of the parking lot here, and you'll see when we do the layout where the building falls. That's inside an easement to Verizon.
Rob, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Can you talk about the topography? I know this area extremely well, and it seems to me that Route 206 is higher in terms of elevation than Somerville Road is, and that far corner, I guess the southeast corner, where it's all trees.
Yes.
Can you talk about where that topography is in terms of the slope from 206? Because that is a concern that the property slopes back towards the residential properties on Somerville Road.
So from a topography perspective and a runoff perspective, as I mentioned, the majority of the site flows to the detention basin up here in the north. And 206, you can see in the front here, this portion of 206, for everybody that's driven by the site, I'm sure everybody has, we're about 10 feet higher on this portion of 206, where my pointer is, going down into the property. Okay, and you can see that in the slope in the grass area that's out front. But when you start getting down to the traffic light and down to the southern portion of the site, it's relatively flat across the property here. And you can see the contour lines, these gray lines on the plan here. You can see it's generally flat here, and the runoff from this area generally heads towards the southern property and eastern property line here. And if you look here, it's generally almost the same elevation. 206 is slightly higher, maybe about 3, 4, 5 feet higher than this property corner right here. So you can kind of get a sense of that delta across that backside of the site, but it is gently falling towards that, I'll call it the southeast corner of the property. And then you can see here as well, there's also a berm that exists on the property today, this landscape berm, that was built as part of the original development. You can see the contour lines that represent that here. That generally splits this portion of the property from the residential lots. But generally, this area back down here is relatively flat.
So the catch basins that are there, that exist right now, are there to catch the water from the impervious pavement, from the parking lots and all. There's no design right now to catch any of that water, correct?
This water that basically from this berm that you see here on the plan to the plan south or to the right, that's just all natural runoff that goes that way today. There's nothing that was collecting that.
Okay. Thank you.
Quick one. Did you say these are fully occupied, the current buildings are over 90%?
Currently occupied, yes.
Wow.
Based on the applicant's representation to us.
And then the other thing was that, you said there was a lot for a bank pad or a bank, was that originally approved back in the day or, right? Or I guess.
I think he said banked parking.
Oh, banked parking.
Yeah. This area all in here, this green grass area, you can see it out there, it's relatively flat. That was actually graded, but the parking was never constructed.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Oh, maybe I should, we commonly, when the board grants some relief from a parking standard, the board in Bedminster often adopts a condition on the relief that the present implementation of a portion of the parking is deferred. It's still required, but deferred, because if the township engineer or the applicant ever determines that it's needed, that banked parking would get built, or some of it. So that's why he referred to it as bank parking. That often comes from these conditions related to a waiver of the present implementation of the required number of spaces. It helps, when you know you're not going to need it, it helps to have the green space.
So I'm going to move on to my next exhibit, which is the site plan rendering, exhibit A3, for the record. And I'm going to spend some time on this plan, basically explaining the proposed improvements and what we are looking to accomplish with this design. So as Mr. Inglesino pointed out, we're here for preliminary final site plan approval with variances and design waivers for the construction of what essentially are 5 buildings on the property and its associated parking and site improvements. To go through each of those components of the site, again, looking at the exhibit, here's our entrance off of 206 on the bottom of the plan here, our exit out to Somerville Road. On the top side of the plan here, we have our 3 existing office buildings, 1400, 1420, 1430. And then we have our proposed improvements. So in looking at the site, we're talking about 5 buildings. We're going to start off with the proposed office building, which, as was mentioned, is a 30,656 square foot 2-story office building. And that's the L-shaped structure you see here on the northern portion of the site. I'll zoom into this portion of the plan. So it's a 2-story office building. The main entrance to the building is located in the inseam of the L shape here, whereas our main entrance into the building. And this is actually going on a portion of the property where the existing parking is today. The existing lawn area is as well. It complies with all the setbacks except for a small covered patio area that we need a variance for, and I'll talk about that in a little more detail later on. We have a series of walkways around the building and drop-off areas in front of the building, as well as a landscaped area behind the building as an amenity space for the users of that building, or the tenants of that building. We are also going to be modifying the parking lot. Right now, the existing parking lot that's there today is right in front of the 1400 building. So there's also that hedgerow that's there now. We're looking to expand that parking lot with another row of parking in the front grass area along the front here to double that parking and then mimic that same hedgerow in front of it. That's there today. And that is the improvements related to that office building. I'm going to get into phasing in a little bit, but that's the improvements in the front part of the site here that's related to the office building. We're also going to be modifying and expanding the existing detention basin in the back of the site with some retaining walls to add some additional volume. That's also going to be tied to what I'll call the phase 1 improvements, which I'll show you in a little bit on the back side of the site. And then the second part of the development are the 4 retail pads that we're proposing. And they're numbered, the buildings are numbered retail buildings 1, 2, 3, and 4 for reference purposes. Retail buildings 1 and 2 are the larger buildings. They're 5,504 square feet apiece. They're 1-story buildings. They will have basements. We're proposing basements on them, essentially for storage purposes for the users within the building. And you'll see from the architecture, their buildings are mirrored. So the building on the left is a mirror image of the building on the right, and you'll see that in the architectural renderings when they're presented. But we have the two retail professional buildings here, and then we have 2 smaller retail buildings, buildings 3 and 4, same square footage, 3,636 square foot each. So the total square footage of the retail space is 18,280 square feet for the combination of all four buildings. And these buildings as well in the front, buildings 3 and 4, will also have basements on them, again, mainly for storage purposes for the users within the building. We're proposing basements on those buildings as well.
Can you zoom that out so I can see the whole?
Sure.
Triangle?
So when we get into some of the details of the site, and we start talking about the improvements on the property, we have to, of course, have parking for all the retail uses. So we are expanding the development on the southern portion of the site with parking around the retail buildings. We're going to be providing an access drive off of the main drive coming in to a plaza area that goes into a T for parking in front of these buildings. We have parking going around the rear of the buildings with a loading area or access drive behind the buildings. And then we're also providing parking along the main drive coming into the site, as well as an additional parking area next to retail building number 3. So in terms of the overall site access, all our parking spaces are 9 by 18. Our drive aisles are 24 foot wide. All comply with the ordinance in terms of geometry and access into the site. In terms of the number of parking spaces, so we do have on the plans a breakdown of the parking requirements for the project. We broke it down into the 2 separate phases for the project. And before I go into the details, I think it would be good if I could just show everyone how we're anticipating the phasing on the project, so you can kind of get a sense of that before I talk about the general detail aspects of the plan. So I'm going to go to Exhibit A4, which is our phasing exhibit.
Question. Can you hear me?
Not time for questions.
I'm not sure who
You
that
should have,
is.
if that's on the computer, Janine,
We haven't opened it up to the public yet.
you should cut the mics on the computer.
I keep muting him, he keeps on muting, but I will.
Oh, well, then you have, no one should be on.
Okay, so just to talk about phasing, so this is Exhibit A4 for the record, and generally speaking, we're looking at essentially 3 phases here. Phase 1, as I talked about, is going to be the office building and its associated parking in the front here. That's the area highlighted in green on the map, plus some walkway improvements along the front of the Forbes building and the landscaping areas around the office building, as well as the detention basin improvements in the back of the property shown here. Phase 2, we've actually split into 2 phases. On the plans that were submitted, we showed it as 1 phase, but we actually looked at this and said we want to probably split this into 2 phases, a phase 2A and a 2B, just from a timing perspective, in terms of what we may construct on the site. But basically the retail would all be part of phase 2A and 2B, which would be all the retail, all the parking for the retail and the buildings themselves and the small parking area around the building number 3. So as Mr. Inglesino pointed out, the intent here is to split the project up so that phase 1 can be built separate from phase 2A and 2B because of permits that are needed from the state for the wetlands and for DOT for related to those phases.
Rob, are you requesting approval on all phases tonight or just phase 1?
Yes, requesting approval on all phases, but basically a phased approval where we can build phase 1 separate from phase 2.
I have a question for Tom. Tom, can we vote on just phase one tonight and not have to vote on the other phases? Can we split this up?
Only, not exactly. Well, I don't even know if it'll be done tonight, but you basically, you have an application before you for preliminary and final for phase one, and preliminary only for phase 2 and 2B, 2A and 2B. So generally speaking, the applicant we're early on in this case, as far as I'm concerned, the applicant is asking you for approval of that. Preliminary and final on phase 1, preliminary only on phase 2.
I think it's preliminary and final on phase 2, Tom, as well.
Oh, it's that as well?
That's the
Okay.
request.
But to build, they want to be able to build phase 1 relatively quickly, because they're going to explain why. So the answer to the simple answer to your question is not exactly and not yet. If they called for a vote on it, you decide a vote. You have to decide a vote on it, but we're not there yet. We're not even close. So let's hear what they have to say and why.
So that's generally the phasing for the site and how we split it up because of the phase 1 work related to the phase 2 work. So in terms of, I'll go back to the site plan rendering, which is Exhibit A3, just to go through some of the parking numbers on the project, because we were asking it to be in 2 phases. We kind of broke the numbers up for phase 1 versus phase 2, just for the purposes of the approval going forward. Ultimately, when it's all built out, we'll end up with a final parking number. But kind of just going through the numbers, the parking that's required for the overall project. This includes the existing office buildings, plus the new office building, plus the retail uses in accordance with your ordinance. We would require 612 parking spaces over the entire property. Okay. Total required for phase 1 of the project is actually 528 parking spaces. So you have a delta there between 528 and 612 between phase 1 and phase 2. But for phase 1, we're going to provide 330 parking spaces under phase 1, which is essentially the rear parking area that's there today, this parking area in front of 1420, the parking in front of the Forbes building, which exists today, this portion of the parking lot that we're going to build in the front field now as part of phase 1, and then we're going to leave the existing parking lot that's in front of 1430 and not touch that. So that's the parking that's going to be part of phase 1, 330 parking spaces that are going to be out there under phase 1. And keep in mind that those 330 spaces, you still have, if I go back to the aerial exhibit, there's still an area of bank parking here that's technically 87 spaces that has not been built yet. But again, we don't anticipate needing that, but it is there on the site nonetheless.
Rob, how many are on the site now? Like
So,
constructed on the site now?
Existing constructed parking is 352 parking spaces were built.
So you're building the new building and reducing the number of stalls for phase 1.
Correct. Down to 330 from 352. Based on the current, and you'll hear this from our traffic engineer too, based on the current operations of the property plus the anticipated office building being built, we feel 330 spaces is going to be more than adequate for this initial phase of the property, with the 87 bank that are off.
But to execute the 87 bank stalls, you'd have to do stormwater design for that.
Well, that was designed as part of the original site.
I would submit that you have to design it in accordance with the new standard.
Okay, well, we have to deal with that.
Yeah.
That's the case. But they were counted for in the original numbers. So that's what we're looking for in terms of phase 1, 330 parking spaces that would be out there today. And as part of phase 1, we are going to be installing as a requirement the EV charging stations that will be on the site. We're actually going to be putting 12 in as part of phase 1. There'll be 4 spaces back behind building 1420, shown on the plan here. Then we're going to be adding 4 more spaces adjacent to 1400 over here, and 4 more spaces out along the front of the office building, shown in the parking lot here. So we'll get a 12 space parking credit for the EV spaces, while that takes you up to 342 based on those numbers for phase 1. When we get into phase 2 is where we would build out the rest of the site and the retail buildings, and then the parking requirement goes up to 612. When you build out the remaining portion of the site, we end up with a total of 504 parking spaces that would be constructed. We're looking to bank 62 of those spaces, and I'm going to go to Exhibit A5, just for reference. This is Exhibit A5, bank parking exhibit. And we're proposing to bank parking spaces along the rear access drive. You'll see 3 rows of bank parking spaces there and 5 additional spaces adjacent to the Forbes building. That's a total of 62 bank spaces. Again, banking them so we don't anticipate the need to build them. And that would bring us up to a total of 566. And then when you add in the additional, I'll go back to Exhibit A3, we're adding 11 more EV charging spaces, 4 here in the expanded parking lot, 1 adjacent to building number 4, shown here, and then 4 more in the parking area here noted as EV. For 11 more spaces, that gives us a total EV credit of 46. So you end up with 612 total spaces to meet your parking requirement with the bank parking and the EV credits for the full build out of the site. So in the initial phase 1, the parking would be less than what was required, but once the site's completely built out, with the EV credits and the bank parking, we would meet the parking requirement of the ordinance.
Are those bank parking, are they behind that retail building?
They're actually, yes, they are. They're actually, if I go back to the exhibit, they're along the driveway here next to one of the office buildings.
So they wouldn't be pulling, they're almost like, go along the curb?
They'd be pulling, they'd be pulling spaces.
Is that where that berm is now?
Well, the berm is pushed over more. So we actually left, if you go back to the site plan rendering exhibit, you see this area in here of green space?
Yeah.
That's where those spaces would go.
What, pointing in that way?
Pulling spaces, yes.
Oh, that's really, okay, that's pretty far away from everything.
Yeah, and then we have some more over here too.
So that wouldn't be green anymore, that's parking basically?
That would be parking yes, that'd be parking. Okay. There'd be grass today, and if spaces were built, it would be parking spaces. I know, Mr. Farrar, you had in your review letter a comment about the basin outline there. We have to just adjust the limits up a little bit prior to constructing, so that it can be there if the spaces are ever built. In this section right here.
Were those spaces included in your stormwater design and lot coverage?
They were. They're actually counted as I get to it as pervious pavement in the calculations. But they were counted.
But they're counted as lot coverage.
Yes, they are. Counted as lot coverage. They're counted in the overall lot coverage. They're counted in everything.
Paul, real quick, are these numbers, I mean, I don't know when these numbers were, it's, what is it, 2 for every certain amount, every 2 spots for, I mean, are they still realistic or?
Which numbers are you talking about?
Parking lot, you need so many spaces per so much.
Parking requirements.
Yeah. Requirements, yeah. Is it, I mean, are these still realistic, the numbers, or?
It depends on who you talk to and what the project is.
Depends who you talk to on this panel and our professionals.
And what the project is.
The fact that there's, 87 bank parking spaces that have not been built?
77.
Yeah, but it does depend, and you've actually had people come to you and ask you for variance to build more than the required number of parking spaces. Doesn't usually happen, but it's a strange world out there. Different tenants demand different needs.
Yeah, because if you're at 90% right now, I drive by, we all do often. It's not very cool. All right.
I think it's a good question for traffic.
That's right. It's the ordinance standard is what you face.
Yeah,
And they face.
I was gonna say, this is all based on the 1 per 225 ordinance standard for basically office, commercial, retail, parking for the site. So in terms of pedestrian circulation, I think if you're out on the property today, you'll notice that I'll go back to exhibit A2, the aerial exhibit. There's internal pedestrian circulation. There's walkways around a pedestrian courtyard. You can generally get from the buildings to buildings out there today, but there really is no circulation basically from the intersection of 206 through the site out to 202 without walking across the parking lot or anything like that. So while you can walk through the parking lot to get there, there's no direct connection. So by adding in, go back to the site plan rendering, Exhibit A3, by adding in the retail components and sort of building out the property, we're creating a pedestrian connectivity from basically Somerville Road to this intersection, coming across with a sidewalk, connecting across the driveway to a sidewalk. We're adding around building 1430, coming around and then connecting to a pedestrian walkway that's going to go as part of the retail buildings and then tie all the way out to Somerville Road and come back around again. Route 206, and come back into the site again. So we're basically connecting 206 to Somerville Road with a pedestrian path through the site by building it out this way. And then we also have some additional connectivity internal to the site as well, from the office building to the existing office buildings that are there. You can see the walkways along here. And we actually have some other additional pathways through the middle of the parking lots here that we're internally looking at whether to keep this as a paver walkway or make it a more of a landscaped hedge with trees. So we're kind of going back and forth on that look through there. But you'll see that in the renderings that are on the site. But that's more for a visual as opposed to the connectivity that we have on the property now that's out there that we want to have with the development that we're proposing. In terms of loading areas and deliveries into the site, your ordinance requires actually loading for each of the buildings, but we're asking for relief from that. Essentially, because of the way the site's laid out and the uses on the site, we don't really need dedicated loading spaces for all of the buildings. For the office buildings, generally the way they function is you have your typical Amazon, FedEx, UPS delivery trucks that come up to those buildings. They usually park right in front of the front doors. They're there for a few minutes and then they leave. We anticipate the same thing for the for the office building that's here, where you have a drop-off area in front that could be used for drop-off for either pedestrians, visitors, or for FedEx or Amazon deliveries, and as well. And then for the retail buildings, what we're looking to do here is for the building 1 and building 2 in the back, there's actually a pull-off area because these buildings, as you'll see from the architectural drawings and the layouts, building 1 and building 2 could actually have up to a total of 8 tenants. Each building could be split into 4 individual tenants. So you could have 8 total tenants across those 2 buildings. So we have a small loading area in the back that's about 60, 70 feet long where deliveries can come from back there. But for the 2 retail buildings in the front here, they can be as many as two tenants in each building, but we really anticipate these to possibly even be 1 tenant. We don't really have a dedicated loading area. A delivery truck can stop either in the parking lot here or they can pull into the parking lot here for deliveries. If those buildings end up being, we anticipate possibly a restaurant use in those buildings, the way they're kind of laid out now, those deliveries would occur when the restaurant isn't open yet, usually off-peak hours from retail usage and things like that. So we don't think there's a need for a fully dedicated loading space for those buildings for them to function and operate on the site. In terms of, there were some comments about trash on the site and how it's being managed there. Basically today, there's an existing trash enclosure in the back corner of the property here that services the office buildings. And that's managed by the property manager. They pick up the trash from the buildings on a predetermined schedule to bring it to the trash enclosure and store it there until it's picked up by a hauler. That's anticipated to continue with this office building that's going to be proposed. There'll be some type of a trash pickup that will occur to bring that trash back to the trash enclosure back here in the corner. And then we are proposing a new trash enclosure, a masonry style enclosure for the retail buildings. It's shown over here on the plan, and this is going to require some relief from your ordinance. We located it here generally due to the way the parking lot's laid out. You'd be able to pull a garbage truck right up to the front of it for loading and unloading. And then we would anticipate some form of property management assisting with bringing trash to those to that trash enclosure for the use of the buildings. If they're strictly retail with no food use, you're going to have less waste than if there's a food use that would require more often bringing trash there, but that would be coordinated with the property management company that would manage the site to bring trash to the trash enclosure and so forth.
The trash, actually, the homes that are located.
No.
No.
Not yet.
Can I just say that if you keep doing that, I'm unfortunately gonna have to remove you. I keep muting you. You have to stay muted until it is time for questions, public questions.
And just as far as trash collection goes, we anticipate, it's a private hauler that manages the site, so the pickup's typically after 7 a.m. in the morning. They won't be there 4 or 5 a.m. picking up garbage, so you won't have the beeping sounds in the early morning hours. It'll be after 7 a.m. in the morning from a trash collection perspective.
How do you know that?
That's based on the property owner who has told us that about pickup time on site trash.
Earlier, I mean, I have a couple properties, they come whenever the hell they want. You know, you're not telling them when to come, and you're not telling the tenants where to put the trash and walk over there. It gets messy, so we can talk about that. But, you know, you can say that's when they're gonna come, and they're gonna pick up, and you're not there's no one there watching this. It can get a little haywire.
Absolutely.
Understood.
That may also be in our ordinance, post 7 o'clock in the morning, I think. We've talked about this before in the hills.
It's 7.
It's 7.
Yeah.
No earlier than 7.
Why trash collection?
You know what, I think
I'm
they
just-
were coming at 6:30.
No, I understand, but I think it was a general.
But anyway,
I'll take a look.
gets-
We've argued this before.
Well, we talked about the project phasing. I'm going to move on to exhibit, unless anybody has any more questions on the site layout or anything like that. I want to move on to just talk about site stormwater and site utilities.
I do have a couple of questions, Ron. So you talked about a lot of things already tonight, but you haven't talked about lot coverage. And I just want to know, in terms of lot coverage, are we under or over the requirement?
So lot coverage for the zone, so just some numbers on coverage. The existing lot coverage for the zone is, the existing lot coverage for the site as it is today, it is 35.3%. Okay, and that actually includes the bank parking, which wasn't built. So it was at 35.3% with the bank parking that wasn't constructed out there, existing conditions. So it'd actually be less than that. That's what's physically there. It's about 35.3%. Under the proposed, the full build out of the property, with the property as you see it on the rendering today, plus the bank parking spaces, it goes up to 54.5% per the percentage on the site. And your ordinance allows for this zone now 65% for this development. So we're at 54.5 with that percentage. So it's still well below what the ordinance allows.
Okay, thank you.
And then I should also probably, while we're talking about some zoning information for the site, floor area ratio for the project. As I mentioned, the existing floor area ratio was we were 87,000 square feet, and the existing FAR for the site is 0.133 FAR. And then with the build out of the property, including the office building and all the retail buildings, and again, the basements and the retail buildings don't count because they're strictly storage. They're not space for habitable area, it's storage space only per your ordinance. We get total 136,496 square feet, which is 0.208 FAR for the site. So 0.208 FAR for the overall site.
So it will be, if you do everything, it'll be 0.208?
0.208, yes.
And what is allowed?
The allowance for the zone is, show you the number right. 0.25.
So you're under the FAR?
Yes.
And lot coverage?
Yes, correct.
And you're under the lot coverage?
Correct. Yeah, all of the major zoning standards we're all under for bulks, for coverage, FAR, building heights all comply as well to the zone.
And impervious would be under that too, I assume?
Correct. Impervious is under that as well. The next exhibit I have is exhibit A6, which is the grading and utility exhibit. Just to generally talk about just some of the high-level utilities that are on the properties that we have here for servicing the site. We do have public water, public sewer, gas, that electric, telephone, cable. It's all out there. It's on the site today. We do need to make some modifications to some of the existing service lines because we're putting the office building over here. It goes through one of our telecom easements, and a water line that services the 1400 building has to be relocated, so we do have to do some utility work for those relocations, but we are going to bring in new water services for the office building. I'm coming off an existing main that's on the property, as well as we'll be bringing in new water services for the retail buildings. Those buildings are not planned to be sprinklered, so they don't need backflow valves or hot boxes that you typically see for New Jersey American Water requirements. At least not right now per the code. If they were to have to be sprinkled, we'd have to add a hot box accordingly, but right now there's no plans for that for those retail buildings. But the majority of the improvements are going to be with the stormwater management systems on site. The existing stormwater management basin, as I mentioned, has to be upgraded and enlarged to handle the new stormwater regulations that were just passed this summer. The new resiliency requirements that were put into effect for the 2100-year storm event, which is basically a 50% increase over the current 100-year storm. So we have to increase the size of that on-site basin to handle additional attenuation. Plus, we're going to be constructing 3 additional green infrastructure bioretention basins that's shown here in the brighter green on the site. They'll all be under-drained and tied into the stormwater management systems, either on the property or into the existing DOT system that leaves the property down here on the southern portion of the site. So those are all been designed to comply with the new standards, as well as we are also proposing on site these purple areas that you see shaded here in the parking spaces and along this back drive aisle. And these actually, unfortunately, these spaces weren't shaded in the bank spaces, but they should have been. They're going to be pervious pavement that we've designed there as well to meet part of the green infrastructure requirements for the development. So we have a mix of bioretention for both water quality and stormwater management, as well as pervious pavement for water quality and stormwater management as well on the site for the newer improvements. I do want to point out that we did do soil testing on the property, and we are not proposing any infiltration because the results came back that there was really de-soils on the property. There really was no infiltration that came back on the site, which again, based on some of the soils we know in the area, it's not surprising that you have that condition, especially since the site's also been regraded and developed over time as well. So again, we have that in the reports provided to Mr. Ferraro's office. I believe he has some comments on stormwater in his review letter, which we'll need to work out and address with his office as well. Moving on to landscaping, I'm going to go back to Exhibit A3. Right on the site today, since it is developed, there's a lot of existing vegetation on the property already that was planted when the property was redone in the late 90s. There's also the southern portion of the site. If I go back to actually Exhibit A2 for the moment, you'll see on here, the southern portion of the site is generally starting to wooded area, but with a lot of scrub and underbrush here as well. That's kind of grown up over time. There are some more mature trees closer to the property line, as well as in this area along the eastern property line here, as well as that berm that was planted about 20 years ago on the site. So we actually did a tree survey. We surveyed approximately 460 trees that we surveyed. We didn't survey every tree on the property because there were some areas that we weren't doing disturbance in, so we didn't survey those trees, but we did survey over 460 trees that were surveyed around the property. We're going to be removing 281 of them as part of this application, a lot of which has to do with that landscaping berm that's there today, and then the southern wooded area that's there on the property. If you look at the site plans, you'll notice the tree sizes. A lot of the trees are between 5 and 12 inches in size. They're small because that area hasn't really been a wooded forest for a long time. I believe it might have even been a grass area at one time many years ago, especially the southern portion of the site. So we're removing 281 trees. In accordance with your ordinance, we require to plant or replacement total of 1,440 trees required to be replaced on site. which unfortunately, given the layout of the property and the proposed development, we can't plant 1,440 trees on this property. It's just not going to fit. Given the fact that half the property is already developed with existing vegetation already. So we are proposing to plant about 200 trees. They're generally shown in the new developed areas around the new retail. And then we are going to be building a new landscape berm. You can see that vegetation all along the eastern property line and wrapping around to the southern property line. That's going to be a berm 3 to 4 feet high that will have landscaping, heavily landscaped on top of it, very similar to what's actually grown in on the existing berm today. It's a mix of deciduous and evergreen trees and shrubs to kind of both kind of screen the lower plus the higher portions of that along that whole entire property line that we have there. And we're going to be leaving about 50 feet of existing vegetation behind the certain lots on Somerville Road already. This section in here, where my pointer is going to remain existing. And then we're going to add the buffering, the berming on that landscaping on the berm on the southern portion of the site. I do want to point out that the lots that are adjacent to the property, basically from this angle point in the property line here, these 4 lots are actually owned by the applicant as well, just for reference purposes. There's an existing vacant lot here plus 3 other residential lots that are owned by the applicant also in terms of this application. So we have about 200 proposed trees. We have over 2,300 proposed shrubs between planting around the buildings and in that berm area and around the site. And then about over 3,000 perennials and ground cover and grasses both around the buildings and especially in the bioretention basins, planting the bottoms of the basins to meet the landscaping requirements of the DEP.
Rob, did you say those 2 retail buildings in the back are single story?
Yes. Okay. They are single story buildings.
Hey, Rob, I have a question about this corner of the property. So the first question I asked earlier was about the slope of the land. And it appears to me, and you can correct me, maybe Paul can jump in here. It appears to me that you're building a retention basin and adding a berm almost along the property perimeter on that southeast corner. And it appears to me that would be an improvement for the properties behind that location, because now the water is being caught or kept. There's some catching there as it cascades off of 206 and downhill.
Yeah, if you go back to my constraints, now that you've seen the plan a bit more, if you look at the topo here, these topo lines are generally going in this direction. So that means the water is flowing in, I'm going to put a point, that general direction. Generally. There's a little bit of nuance to it a little bit, but that's generally the way it flows. It might even turn this way a little bit, and it might even kind of focuses itself that way. We're looking at 1 foot contours. Like I said, that area is generally flat in there. A lot of scrub and brush. So, you got to take with the topo with a little bit of understanding that the aerial topo might be slightly askew because of all that scrub and brush, but generally that's the direction it's going in. So once you go ahead and you take this entire area and you go back to the site plan rendering and you construct this berm and you put this basin in here, now we are collecting a large amount of that water that was going towards that property line. We're going to be putting it in the basin and then tying it into that. There's a drainage pipe that's actually in front of, actually right in front of the property corner, right here, that goes into the drainage system of 206, and then discharging it into there. So yeah, so the runoff will be reduced to those properties once this phase is constructed.
Paul, do you have anything to add to that? Is that an improvement on the situation, or?
It depends on what you consider to be an improvement. I think it certainly would intercept the water that runs that direction. When I get my chance, I have a number of questions that I'll go over.
Okay. It's just from experience, I know that those 3 or 4 properties in that southeast corner in heavy rain just literally get flooded. And then the water runs through their properties down onto Somerville Road and then continues down again. So I want to just understand that it's an improvement for the people that live in that area. And those are residential people. Thank you, Rob.
You're welcome. So generally speaking, we're talking about landscaping. So we were talking about the berm, the landscape, the number of trees that we're planting on the site. But we are asking for relief from your ordinance for planting the 1,440 total replacement trees due to the way the site's laid out. And I'll go through all the relief at the end when we're done here. The next thing that I want to talk about is lighting, which is Exhibit A7 for the record. And this is a representation of lighting plan, the plan set, but I know there were some comments about lighting in the review letters as well, so I'll try to kind of touch on it all as I talk about lighting for the site. One of the things that we are going to do is the existing lighting out there today, it's the older style lighting, so we are going to replace or relamp all the existing lights with a new LED style light, so we're going to be consistent across the entire property with a new lighting style, and you'll see that the detail down here in the lower left-hand corner is the type of fixtures that we're going to propose on the site. We call them type A and type B. There's two slightly different styles of fixtures, but we are proposing to relamp the entire site with these new LED style light fixtures and replace the old lights that are out there. A number of the light locations will remain the same, especially in the existing parking lot areas. We'll utilize the same bases and either new poles or new heads on those fixtures at the heights that were generally 14 to 16 foot in height, especially for the rear parking area here, the parking area in front of to the office building, and a portion of the existing parking lot that's here, as well as in the front of the Forbes building. And then we'll, of course, expand the parking lot lighting around the rest of the site accordingly. I do want to point out that, generally speaking, the light levels in the parking areas are, and we did a calculation of this, they're on average about a 2-foot candle average through all the parking areas, which is slightly higher, which is higher than your ordinance allowable of 1-foot candle, but it generally provides a consistent lighting level across all the parking lot areas, given both you're going to have office use here, and you're going to have retail use and possibly even restaurant use in the evening hours across all the parking areas. There was a comment in Mr. Farrar's letter about the lighting color. So we're okay with maxing it out by 3,500 Kelvin, which is a little bit more of the yellowish tinge to it as opposed to the brighter white that you see in a lot of LEDs, almost like a daylight color. If you're in the 4,000 to 5,000 range, that's daylight. We're going to be in the 3,000 to 3,500 range. We'll make sure of that on the plans, so it's a little more subdued. One of the other things is, since we're doing all new LEDs, we're going to relamp everything. We'll have the ability to control the lighting levels via remote, so that if for whatever reason the levels seem a little bit too high or you have to make an adjustment, we'll be able to do that with the controller system on here, that you don't have that ability with the current incandescent bulbs that are out there today. So that's going to give us the ability to make adjustments. If you have some concerns about closer to the residential lots, even though these are all going to be, I'll call them shielded on the backside, so the light doesn't go towards the residential lots, we can make adjustments to those parking lot lights once they're up and once they're in place. The LEDs have the ability to do that much better than what you could do with the prior technology as far as that goes. In terms of I'll say the lighting around the buildings, there was a comment in the review letters about the number of lights around the buildings. If you look, I'll zoom into the two retail buildings, Retail Building 1 and Retail Building 2. I forget there's a lag from what I'm seeing on my screen. So you see it around these buildings, you see a lot of letter Ds and letter Fs. Ds are actually building mounted lights. They're actually down lights. We do have to have lights at the doors, but looking at the plan and talking with the architect, and when the architect testifies, you hear from them as well, but we can probably reduce the number of D lights around the building you see here and bring it down to maybe just the door locations and maybe something a little less than what you see there. We've got, when you look at it, you've got 4 doors along the front, but we've got 5 D lights. We got lights on the corner. So we'll look to, kind of reduce that a little bit and bring those levels down of those D lights. And just to give you a sense of what those lights are, they're the snack style fixture light that you see around town, and that's the detail that those lights are. But we can certainly reduce the number of those lights in terms of what's shown on the building. The other thing that we have here is we had all these Fs, or bollards, that we were using to define that entry feature of the retail area here, as well as in front of the office building. over here. And we actually made every bollard a lighted bollard, but in going back and taking a look at that, we said, you know what, that's probably a little bit too much. So what we'll look to do is probably do like every third or fourth one as a lighted bollard. So you can have still have that ambiance of the ground lighting, but not have it as bright as you see there. Even though bollards don't throw light that far, we still want to have lighting in those intersections because vehicles are coming through. So a combination of the bollard lights and pole lights will, minimize that a little bit and kind of take those levels down. So in terms of lighting, there's also lighting on the office building, and I'll let the architect talk about why you see all these C fixtures around the building. They're pin lights up on the building that are with the canopy. So you'll hear from the architect a little more about why those were done that way. And then if we can reduce some of those, we'll also look to do that as well. There was one or two areas, if you notice the calculations, there was actually a maximum of 12 foot candles on the plan. You may say, where is that? On the back of the office building, there's a covered canopy, and you see there's 6 lights here, and that's where that maximum light was, underneath the canopy of the back side of the office building for that amenity space. So that's why we were getting a higher light level back there. But we felt that given it was a covered area, it would be used by employees, maybe in the early evening hours, we had a higher light level there. But for the most part, the levels are generally consistent across the site. And we have, if you look at the overall lighting plan, we've got zeros at the property lines, certainly along the backside where the residential is, those are all zeros back there. So there's no light spillage going back towards the residential properties, both on the east and on the south side of the site. In terms of timing for the lights, generally I believe the existing lights now are 10 p.m. In talking to the applicant for the office buildings. What we would ask is the same 10 p.m. Time, plus if there's going to be a restaurant use on the property, that we'd allow for 1 hour after closing to leave the lights on for the restaurant use for their employees and patrons to leave. So it would be generally 10 p.m. or 1 hour after closing of the restaurant uses if they are on the property. If they aren't their regular retail, then it would be 10 p.m. at the latest for the site. And again, we don't know the tenancy makeup yet of that, but that's generally what we're asking for. My last exhibit, actually no, I have 2 more. Next exhibit is A8, which is our signage exhibit for the project. If you notice on the site plans, there was a summary chart of all the signage that we're proposing on the property. So we put together an exhibit to kind of just identify where all those signs are and kind of just go through them so you have an understanding of where they're at, because there are going to be some waivers and variances associated with the signage. Oh, and I do want to point out, back on the lighting for one moment, there were some comments in the review letters about uplighting of some of these signs on the buildings. And we spoke with the architect about that, and we're going to change any signage that'll be illuminated will be to downlighting. It will not be uplit. So whatever waiver or variance we requested for that, we're going to, take that off the table and just have all downlighting on the signage on the buildings. There is, on the office building, we are proposing one of the signs to be a halo lit sign, which is technically internally illuminated per your ordinance standards. So we'd like to have that deviation so we can have the halo lighting on that office sign. And that's, we've done that before in other office buildings in town, have the halo lighting, which is the lighting behind the letters that just kind of light it up and wash the face of the building slightly.
But the letters are opaque, right?
The letters are opaque.
So that it's not internally illuminated, you're lighting behind.
Correct. The lighting shines from the letter towards the facade.
Right, so it's not an internally illuminated sign.
Correct. But it's still painted.
So you don't need the relief?
You
never did?
Well, then I stand corrected, because I know I've gotten relief in the past.
There were some in the past where the sign material was translucent, and it came through, and that's where relief was required. But going back to the Affinity Credit Union sign, just up the street, that was one of the first where we had the opaque letters and the lighting behind it.
Gotcha. I know when I did the MPS Pharmaceuticals one, we got a relief for that one. So that's a couple of years ago.
Right.
Okay, so that's fine. So then in that regard, then we wouldn't need anything for the halo light. We wouldn't have that on the building. But we will eliminate the uplighting on a couple of the signs and have it all as downlighting for the purposes of the site lighting. Except the only one that we do have small uplighting on when we get to the sign exhibit is the front entry sign. We do want to have 2 ground mount signs to eliminate the front entry sign. I'll get to that in one moment now on the exhibit, which is A8. That's actually the first sign that I'm going to be talking about. There's an existing monument sign when you come in off of the entrance to 206, right here in the landscaped island. Okay, it says, I forget exactly what it says, Advance Realty or Advance at Bedminster on there. So we want to repurpose that sign and add signage to it to describe the project. So we have a detail of that sign. We want to rebrand it Bedminster Village Square out there, and then have a couple of placards for tenant labeling on this sign for certain tenants. It may not be for all of them, but have a couple of tenant signs on there. So the brick would remain, and we'd add a cap to it as well, just kind of change the look of it a little bit. And we want to have just 2 ground mounted lights. There's actually 2 ground mounted lights on either side to illuminate the signage.
That's up there.
That's out there.
That's uplighting.
I think it's uplit already. Yes, it's uplighted. So we're asking for relief for that. For that sign.
So they actually are listening, Rod.
Are you surprised?
Every word. So that's the front main entry sign that we're looking to do for that, and just repurpose that sign in the front entrance. That's down here labeled as sign A. Once you come into the site, when you come around the bend at the main entry to the retail buildings 1 and 2, you see a sign labeled B. That's this little rectangle here on the plan. We want to make this a directional retail monument sign that just lists out all the tenants that are on the property. We got space for 10 tenants here. It's a 24 square foot sign. So actually, this wasn't listed in the list of variances, but it actually is, because it's a second theoretical monument sign on the property where one is permitted. So I'll go through that when I go through the variances, but it's a 24 square foot sign. It's not illuminated. So, and it's going to be kind of made out of more of a wood material to kind of fit in with the site and the architecture. When you get to the architecture, you'll see that. So that's retail sign B over here on the property. And then what we also would like to do is there's a series of directional signs on the property today. They're actually 4 square feet. Your ordinance only allows 2 square feet. So we're looking to replace all of the directional signs. And we have a detail for that down here in the lower left-hand corner. It's going to be a 2x2 or 4 square foot directional sign, kind of just give you a sense of where the different buildings are. We may have some addresses on here for the buildings or so forth, but it's a 2x2 sign. And we want to replace all those signs on the property with that directional sign. Those are also not illuminated as well. And we need relief from the ordinance for that. And we want to have a consistent, branding of signs across the entire property now. And then when you get into the buildings themselves, we'll start off with the office building. This will have 2 signs on it. They'll be on the southern facade. And you'll see this in the architectural elevations. Sign 1 and sign 2. They're a total of 70 square feet in total. The ordinance allows 75. So that is allowed, but we are asking for a waiver because you have 2 signs on a single-use building. But given the location of the building and how cars are coming up 206, we felt that having 2 signs would be better for identification purposes once you come into the site versus when you're driving on 206. So we're asking for 2 signs there. And they will both, again, one of them was shown as a linear uplight. We're going to change that to a downlight so that no waiver will be needed on those signs if you see that on the architectural plans. For the retail buildings, 1 and 2, you'll see 4 signs on each of the front of those buildings. Those signs comply with your ordinance requirements for size and so forth, but there are 4 signs shown because there could be up to 4 tenants in that building. If there's only going to be 2 tenants, there'd be 2 signs, but we have an option for up to 4 based on the layout of those buildings. And then lastly, the 2 retail buildings along 206, buildings 3 and buildings 4, these are basically buildings that both front on 206 and internal to the site. So if you're coming in off of Somerville Road, you wouldn't see the signage on 206. And conversely, if you're driving on 206, you wouldn't see the signs internal to the site. So for these buildings, we're actually asking for signage on both sides of the building. So again, that's a deviation from your ordinance standards, but we're asking for it on both sides. The size of the signs comply, but we are asking for it on both sides of the building because of the orientation of the buildings. These are basically almost what you'll see the architecture, but they're almost like four-sided architecture because you see all around the buildings here on the property. And the architects will show you the elevations of the buildings and what they look like.
Rob, the size of each sign complies, but you're asking for twice as many because they're on both sides?
Correct.
Or the total?
The size complies, but we're asking for we have more than one sign per tank. And they'll be downlit as well. So that's the signage on the property. Lastly, what I would like to do is go through the variances that we're requesting relief from for the project. And I have one last exhibit for that. And I'm going to actually jump back and forth to a couple of other exhibits as well, but this exhibit is entitled A9 Project Variance Exhibit. I'm just going to go through the list of variances on the project, and then our planner will provide additional testimony on these as well. Some of them are shown on the plan, some of them are just going to be verbalized for the record. So going down the list, and then this is in the order that we have them listed on the cover sheet. Plus, I have to add in the additional one for that sign that I just talked about before. So a variance is going to be requested from section 407.5 for a minimum principal building front yard setback of 48.1 feet, where 50 foot is required for the proposed retail building 3 and 4. And this is for, and I'm going to zoom into the exhibit here. Here's retail building 3, and then retail building 4. So both of these buildings, and actually it's a little hard to see on here because of the setback line. The purple line is the 50-foot setback line. Both of the buildings themselves, building 3 and building 4, comply with the 50-foot building setback. But because we're putting a basement on these buildings, we need a window well for those buildings. And actually, if I go back to site plan rendering A3, I'll zoom into the front. You can see the white line is the setback line, and the window well right here is for the basements. So that's at 48.1 feet. That's the relief we're asking for. Is for the window well itself. It's part of the building foundation. There's no structure above it, but it's still within the building setback. This one's at 48.1, and building number 4, which is actually 48.7. But the relief is for the closer of the two, but it's for both of them in total for that variance. So the next one is for from section 407.5 for minimum principal building side yard setback.
Rob, can you just go back to that?
Oh, sure.
So why can't you just move it back to 50 feet? Like, are you facing a rear yard setback there that?
Well, for building 3, what we're trying to do is line them both up along the front, but building 4, when I get to it, there's actually a variance for building 4 to building 2 that then comes into play for how those two are related to each other.
What do you mean by trying to line them up? Why do you line them up at 50 feet, including you called it a basement. First of all, why even have a window well? And then second of all, why not just be 50 feet, both buildings?
Well, for building 3, I was trying to stay from development. There's actually some trees there I was trying to stay away from, so I was trying to keep the building away from those trees. I guess I can look at moving it 2 feet if it doesn't impact some of the other development that's over there. But for building 4, if I comply with the 50, then this variance that I've had here actually goes down more to 39 and change. So we were trying to just kind of balance out the location of the buildings in relation to the setbacks, and the window wells just we went over the setback lines. We felt that they were something that we could ask for relief on and keep the buildings themselves in compliance.
What is the need for the window wells? We don't usually see that in commercial buildings.
I'll have to defer to the architect on why they designed them on the buildings. So.
And does your floor area ratio include your basement spaces?
No, because they're just storage, so it doesn't count towards the overall FAR.
Right. So, the window well. Okay. I'll wait for the architect.
Okay, but all right. Sounds kind of unnecessary, to tell you the truth, so let's keep going.
So the next variance was for, from section 407.5, for minimum principal building side yard setback of 97.2 feet, where 100 foot is required for the office building covered patio area. So again, this was for this setback to the northern property line. This is a covered patio area, so it's a covered portion of the building, a covered portion of the patio. So again, we were asking for some slight relief because given the layout of the site here, the way the building is laid out versus the angle of the property line, a small portion of that was going over the setback line without having to shift the building further over to the right, just to deal with having the covered patio area comply.
What is that for? I don't understand that. And what's that white circle there?
Oh, so this area back here is a landscape courtyard area for the building. So this was just a patio space and some seating areas back here. That's kind of been envisioned by the landscape architect for that area. So just as an amenity space, it could be adjusted or modified before this is.
Is that why there's no loading dock?
Is it? I'm sorry.
There's no loading dock, I guess.
No, there's no loading dock back there because we wouldn't, for this building, again, as I said before, it really doesn't need it for the purposes of being an office building. But they wanted to provide amenity space for the tenant, for their employees back there.
Hey, Rob, where's the vault?
The vault is right.
That's what the manholes are for.
Actually, it's right in this area right here.
So you're building a patio over the vault?
No, hold on, let me give my bearings here.
Right. I assume it's under the telephone manholes.
No, the manholes move over a little bit.
What are the manholes for then?
They're part of the conduit that runs underground. I think it's over this way a little bit more. This is an existing utility pads. It's not showing up on here the way it should.
So it's essentially behind the office building?
It's to the left of the office building. It's generally in this area right over here. Right here. See my point is right here. Do you have the white? It's pad.
No.
All right. It's telling me the white box, but I think it goes underground, the structure.
Yeah.
So it's in the corner of the parking lot that's there. So the conduit comes into the manholes, goes into the underground structure, then goes back out to 206.
So, but basically, based on your plans, you're honoring this entire easement of Verizon. Is that the idea?
The majority of it is a small portion. What happens is if I go back to the constraints exhibit,
right,
we're honoring this whole portion of the easement. And you see these two dots right here?
Right.
Those are the manholes.
Okay.
Okay, we're honoring this whole portion of the easement. This is the underground vault, is actually in this corner right here. Here's the two of the above ground, I guess they're fans or so forth for the vault. But this portion of the easement only services the internal to the site.
Okay.
So we have to relocate that portion of the conduit because it's over the building. But this portion of the easement, which comes in from 206, goes into the vault, and they have conduit that goes back out again, as part of their infrastructure. We can't really move that.
But you're coordinating and asking for consent from Verizon for whatever you're doing that's different, right?
Correct. And that has to be coordinated with that. So yeah, there's that white spot here, and the vault is in this area right here.
It's not like a safety problem, right, for the people in the backyard of this building, that it's not exposed wiring or anything like that?
No, it's
totally enclosed vault.
Right. Cars parked next to it today, so there's no safety issue with it. And you can see we actually have a fence kind of going around this area as well to kind of separate that equipment from the amenity space.
What's bluestone or something, or what's that, blue stop? Or?
I think that's pointing to. It's supposed to be pointing the other way. This is calling out as bluestone, but that could change before we're done in terms of what the final patio surface will be back there. So the next variance that we're asking for is from section 407.5. This is for the separation between buildings. Your ordinance requires 50 feet, which we generally comply with everywhere except for this one section right here, where we're asking for 41.7 in terms of that separation distance. And we have 50 foot between the retail buildings here, but because these buildings are not parallel to each other, they're at an angle. Again, we're looking at the location of it, it's only at this closest point where it's 41.7, and as the buildings move away from each other, you eventually have more than 50 feet between them.
That's the one where if you pushed it back a foot and...
If I push this back 2 feet, that would go down probably to 39 and change.
Okay. I'd encourage you to do that.
That's what? Sorry.
Both those buildings.
Correct. The next variance is for the trash enclosure. This is also from section 407.5 for a minimum accessory structure rear yard setback of 51.4 feet. So here's the property line. The trash enclosure is set back 51.4 feet from the property line. In this location here, and again, this is where, as I explained why we picked this location for it. It's a masonry enclosure. There's the landscape berm behind it. You have landscaping around it. This is the location where we're showing it on the plan. As I mentioned, these lots were owned by the applicant as well.
What's the requirement there?
Requirement is 75 feet. We're at 51.4. And then the next variance we're asking for is from section 407.5D for a required 100-foot minimum planted buffer along any common property line within a residential district where a buffer of 42 foot is proposed. So this is basically, the ordinance requires a 100-foot planted buffer from the residential properties. So you have residential properties on the south and along the eastern side of the site. And so as I mentioned, these 4 lots, basically from this property line right here all the way to the driveway, are owned by the applicant. These of course are not. But we are proposing to have a reduction of the buffer, basically from this corner line right here, where it starts with this property that the applicant owns, down to here where we're adding the drive aisle in here, and the access road behind the retail buildings. So we're asking for reduction of the buffer there, down to 42 feet in some spaces along those lots, and then we maintain it the rest of the way.
Is that for the banked parking?
That's for the bank parking in that area, correct?
Which may not be built.
And the drive aisle.
And the drive aisle.
And the drive aisle
bank
itself
park
is in the 50 feet?
And the trash enclosure, yes.
The bank parking is the closest to 42 change feet.
So, and how deep are the bank spots?
18.
So if the bank parking is not built, are you
within 60 roughly?
Okay.
Other than
the trash enclosure?
Right. Here's the trash enclosure, 51. Here's the setback line, the dash purple line right here.
Excuse me, Bob, is it possible to make your cursor bigger? You know, you're flipping around, you're moving around so quick, it's hard to follow it. You know?
It's in settings. Just saying.
Sounds like somebody knows Bluebeam.
Or just go to settings in Microsoft, and you can change your cursor.
I may blow up my computer.
Yeah, it's gonna reboot.
No, it won't.
Maybe I'm not gonna mess with that now. Sorry, I'm almost done.
Rob, is that yellow line the property line?
The yellow line is the property line.
And it jogs out like that?
Yes, there's actually a jog here.
So then, Rob, for lots 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, you've maintained the 100-foot landscape buffer?
Correct. You got the landscaping plus the buffer, and the basins in there too, but it's landscaped.
Right.
Correct. Different forms of landscaping.
And it is, we doing landscape testimony as well, or is that separate?
I think I just covered it.
You just covered it? Okay. And that's, do you have any other rendering for the view shed?
We have some renderings from the architect that will show the property from a bird's eye view, so I think you'll see the landscape.
And that'll show the landscape?
Yes.
Rob, do you have an elevation on the proposed berm? Because it's getting moved back, so it's gonna be different than what's there.
It's approximately the berm itself, based on the grading plans, we're actually going to be filling about 4 feet from the existing grade. So we're bringing it up about 4 feet, which brings the plantings up to maybe a foot above the parking level. Then we have the plantings on top of there, because the grade drops off in the back there. So by bringing it up about 4 feet, we bring the planting up to the level of the site, above the existing planting that's there already. Buffer area. I talked about, but just to re-mention it again, a variance is being requested from section 401.2D for the minimum required parking for phase 1 of the project, where we have 528 spaces are required, and we're proposing 330 actual spaces to be built. And when you add in the EV credit, it goes to 342 spaces for phase 1. And then a variance is being requested from section 407.9A for the minimum off-street loading spaces. Your ordinance requires a 15 by 40 loading space for each building, for new office building. But in this case, we're not proposing loading, as I mentioned already, on these buildings in a traditional sense, except for buildings 1 and 2. We do have a pull-off area that's 9 by approximately 60 or 70, but it doesn't meet your 15 by 40 requirement. So we are asking for relief from having the off-street loading spaces for these buildings.
Rob, question? I know I'm asking a lot of questions tonight, I apologize, but the loading behind those two 5,000 square foot buildings, do you envision that to be used by tractor trailers?
We don't really envision like tractor trailers coming into the site. You might get, if there's going to be a food use there, you might get the typical Cisco truck that would come for that food delivery, if it's a food use. But if it's a retail use, we don't envision tractor trailers for that. And usually those aren't the larger trucks, usually a smaller box that would come in for a tractor trailer, but we don't envision that happening. Not a large size tractor trailer that you will see.
If I know you have a traffic expert, but if it were a tractor trailer, do you have enough mobility around those buildings?
Yeah, for a smaller tractor trailer, not your big WB62, but a WB40 or 50, can maneuver around the site and get through the parking lot. But we wouldn't anticipate. But again, we're not designed for a WB60 to come in or WB62 to come into the site. I'll leave that to our traffic engineer to talk about what these buildings typically get, but it's not meant for something like that. It's not meant for like a supermarket type of delivery that you might see at a shopping center. We don't anticipate that here.
I have one more question for you.
That's right.
I'm almost done. How much of this lot is in the historic district?
The whole property is in the historic district, yeah.
I'll wait for the plan.
Okay, so then moving on to the signage, a variance is being requested from section 407.9A for the size of the on-site directional signage. I showed you the detail previously. The ordinance only permits 2 square feet. We're asking for 4 square feet for the on-site directional signage. The existing signs are actually 4 square feet originally, but we're asking for the new signs to all be 4 square feet as well. Just given the number of buildings, the addresses, and so forth, we want to have that additional extra space for directional signs around the property. Then we're also from a variance from section 407.9B for the number of signs on the office building. As I pointed out, there are 2 signs on the office building where only 1 is permitted and 2 are proposed. So we're asking for relief from that requirement. And then this is an additional variance that was not originally listed for that 24 square foot site directional sign for the retail buildings. It's also from section 407.9A, where theoretically it's a directional sign, or it's even or it's a secondary monument sign for that matter, where only 1 monument sign would be permitted on the property for that sign. So that's relief is needed for that as well. And then we have a series of design waivers. I believe I touched on a couple of these already, but I'll go through them again. I talked about design waivers for the site illumination. We need a waiver from your maximum level of 4-foot candles, and that maximum I said was 12.3 over by the office building for the covered patio area. We also have your ordinance requires a minimum of 0.2-foot candles, but we have we have 0-foot candles along all the property lines and off the development area. So theoretically, that's a deviation. And then your ordinance requires an average of 1-foot candle across the site. We're at 2.2-foot candles when you take into account all the parking lot lighting and so forth around the site. So we're asking for a deviation from as well. And that number will probably go down a little bit when we pull out some of the bollards and some of the building lights. We're also asking for we were asking for deviations for uplighting on the buildings, as well as the halo-mounted lighting, but as Mr. Farrar pointed out, halo lighting no longer requires a variance, or never did. So since those are solid letters, that's not a deviation anymore. And then we're going to modify all the on-site building lighting to be down lighting instead of up lighting. So the only thing that's left that will be uplit will be the monument sign at the front of the site. Will be the only uplighting on the property that we're asking for relief on.
Which is currently uplit.
Correct. A design waiver is being requested for from section 512.3b.1 for providing only one sign for each permitted retail use. For the case of buildings 3 and 4, we have 2 signs for each retail use that we're asking for relief on because of the building frontages, both internal and external to the property. And then we're also asking for a design waiver from section 526B, which is your maximum tract yield calculation for the resource conservation areas on the property. When you do the calculation based on taking out the wetland areas on the property today and a couple of slopes that are there, your permitted floor area ratio is 124,617 square feet, and the project's proposing 136,496 square feet. So we do need a waiver from that requirement for the project. I do want to point out that the calculation is based on current existing conditions at the time the application's made, but we are going to fill in the wetland areas, and once they are filled in with a permit from the state, then the site comes into compliance with your requirement. So it's not in compliance currently now as it is, so a waiver is required. And then lastly, a design waiver from section 12-6B3 of the Township ordinance for replacement trees where 1,440 are required, and we're proposing 200 on the site. So lastly, I just want to touch base on third-party approvals because we were talking about phase 1 and phase 2 on the project. So just to put on the record, because we want to build phase 1 separate from phase 2, phase 1 would technically require, of course, planning board approval, Somerset County board approval, soil conservation district approval, and we would need a TWA permit for the sewer connection for the building. That would be required for starting the work on that building. But for the rest of the site, we would also need a wetland permit to fill in the wetlands for the retail buildings, and because the retail buildings therefore trigger a DOT permit, which our traffic engineer will talk about, need a DOT permit for the retail buildings as well. So given the time frame for some of those buildings, as Mr. Inglesino pointed out earlier on, given the time frame for some of those permits and the requirements to deliver the office building for the tenant, we really want to look to start the site work on phase 1 right in the beginning of the new year once we have our permits, and then have that hopefully constructed by the end of 2024. In the meantime, we anticipate getting the wetland permits and the DOT permits to take anywhere from 6 months to a year with the state for those permits. So then that would give you a sense of the retail would lag at least a year behind the office building construction in terms of what we're anticipating. And that could
need a DOT drainage permit
for the retail or as part of the DOT access, as part of the DOT major access permit. Be part of that.
It's a separate permit, but you still need it.
Correct. It has to be, yes. I always kind of group it together. It is separate from that. And that basically covers my.
But Rob, you're saying that the office building does not need either of those? It doesn't need the DOT permit, and it doesn't need any DEP permit?
Correct.
And is that because it's under the trigger for DOT highway access management permit?
I'll defer that to our traffic engineer, but.
Okay, but he'll explain that. Okay, yep. So, but you're also saying, I hope, that you're not going to do any disturbance of the wetlands or transition area that you believe exist.
No, we can't disturb those areas till we have a permit. And that's why that's all part of the phase 2 portion of the work.
Right, so none of the work that's being done will be within the expected to be approved transition area or the wetlands.
Correct.
Until you have that permit.
Correct.
Okay. So you're really not, all you're doing is saying, we'll get all the permits for phase 1 and then we'll start work.
For phase
For
one,
phase
correct.
one.
And then phase two, when we
Okay.
get those permits, we'll start work on that down the road.
Okay, thanks.
But you guys anticipate certainly potentially having the office phase one complete before phase two starts?
Based on the timing,
Potentially.
that's potentially what could happen, yes. I mean, DOT could surprise me, but I would not think anything shorter than a year, but again, that's the idea.
Okay, let's take a 5-minute break and resume in 5 minutes. Let's go. Paul, I think you had some questions that you wanted to ask.
If you want to let me go first.
I'll let you go first.
I'll go first. I did have I wrote a letter dated October 10th. There's a number of things in there, but I'd like to go off script for the moment and go about the things that I wrote down tonight, because if I don't get to them, I won't be able to read my handwriting.
I understand.
When you were, Rob, if you could just zoom out a little bit on that image right there, please. A little further. Maybe the landscape plan. Bring up the landscape plan. That's got too much. This has too much extra. Good? No. There you go.
There it is.
Okay. You talked about the aisle between the parking banks that runs south from the office buildings. And I think you said that right now it's shown as a paver area with planters in it and that sort of thing, but it might be something else.
This area here,
Yes.
right? Yes.
But if you make it so it's not a walkway, then the people in the office building can't get down to the retail.
No, they can, because we would modify this walkway through. We'd have them cross here, go through here, we have to connect it this way.
Why would you do that? You're going to cross the main access aisle into the office buildings with pedestrian traffic. Why wouldn't you just have that walk straight down to particularly building 3? You wouldn't have to cross anything.
Agree from a pedestrian access standpoint. We were just looking at just, you need to have that through here. If the folks were in this building, they can walk this way. Instead of having two means, we're just looking to have one. But if
I'm just saying, it seems to be logical to have that be your walkway. And one thing that you said a couple of times, and I think eventually, which means pretty soon, things are going to have to be nailed down, because you're talking about, well, it's labeled as bluestone, but it might be something else. It's labeled as this circular area, but we might change it to something. All that has to be resolved before we're done.
Agreed. The back landscaping of this building and the pavement types right around it.
And the board needs to see that. Okay, so you can't just say, we're going to have some amenity space back there, but we don't know what it is. I think maybe the board doesn't care, but I would think the board would.
I think so.
All cares right there.
Another concern I have relates to the parking and the proximity of parking to buildings 1, 2, and 4. If you look at that area, and maybe your traffic engineer can come up with this before he testifies, is what is the parking ratio for those 3 buildings in the areas where you don't have to cross the main drive aisles? Because it seems to me that there's very limited parking down there. All of it is single loaded aisles around those 3 retail buildings. And generally speaking, I think there's a ton of space available for the office building, but it's all north of the 2 large office buildings. And that's the area that's always empty, and nobody's going to park there and come to the retail.
I think that's a fair question. I don't have the number in front of me.
All my questions are fair.
All right. But yeah, we'll get that ratio for those buildings and see what that is.
You said that your banked parking was permeable.
Yes.
Okay, is that required as a BMP for the drive aisle that's not permeable? And does that parking need to be constructed to make your stormwater work?
No, the drive aisle is already permeable, so that meets its requirement already.
Well, but I don't think there's a portion of your banked parking that extends beyond the permeable driveway.
Hold on, it might be down over here. Let's go back to the thing.
Oh, in other words,
The
the
section right here.
Yeah.
reserved parking spaces are not, they're not pervious pavement?
No, they're intended to be permeable pavement, but it may be required to put them in to make the stormwater work because they extend beyond the permeable driveway.
I will double check for these about 6 or 7 spaces right here, just to make sure that they don't need to be in to account for this pavement right here.
Okay.
That's what I'll make sure of that. And if there's an issue with these, I can always direct them into the bioretention basin.
Okay.
So I have some options for that. So it wouldn't be where it would be an issue where you would not have treatment on this little section of pavement. I understand what you're looking for.
And I want to make a statement about the permeable pavement. Generally, it needs to be in areas that don't have heavy traffic and that you're not turning on, because it will come apart. If and when those banked parking stalls are installed, you will be turning on the permeable pavement. It's a main drive aisle behind that office building. While the DEP says it's a BMP that you can use, structurally, from an engineering perspective, I think it needs to be carefully applied. It's not my parking lot. I'm not going to own it, but it's going to be a problem. But it will be the owner's problem, not mine.
Understood.
Hey, Paul, can I piggyback for a second? Jump in?
Yeah.
Rob, in front of the new office building, did you say there were good, part of those spaces were going to be permeable as well?
Yes, these are, if you could see the hatching across the front here, these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and these down here are permeable pavement, yes.
Is there some reason those were chosen? I mean, it just sort of seems to be stuck in the middle of the plan.
It's based on water quality requirements for new pavement versus where this is draining to the existing basin, and this is all new here, so the way it's designed, it's a 3-to-1 ratio for runoff that goes into them, so that's why we picked this strip of parking here, that this parking area drains into this for the purposes of water quality. Okay. Yeah, so we had to pick and choose certain locations for it on site.
One thing I don't recall, and forgive me, and we'll get into the detail and you can just show it to me, because I don't know how you do the transition of the pavement between the permeable and the regular asphalt. I've seen it done with a curb to differentiate the two, but how do you pave one against the other?
Yeah, look at the detail. There has to be an edge for the two to mate up against each other.
Exactly. It's, again, the DEP likes this stuff, but they've never tried to build it.
I'm shocked.
I just want to correct you one thing. I believe the permitted floor area ratio is 0.21. You said 0.25?
Did I misspeak on that?
I think that's what your chart said.
I'm sorry, thank you, Paul. It's 0.21. I was reading the number below it. Sorry.
Okay, yeah, 0.21. So what you said before about 0.25, you meant 0.21.
Yes, yes. Thank you for
That's
correcting.
the maximum that you need, that you're asking for.
And the site, we're proposing 0.208.
208.
So you comply with it.
Yes.
The lighting, you talked about reducing it. I am concerned, and I just have to bring it to the board's attention that as proposed, these buildings are lit like I don't think any other building in town. The existing office building doesn't have this kind of lighting around it. I understand what's being done with some of the accent lighting. You talked about the buildings 1 and 2, where there were 5 lights on the front but 4 doors. But if you look at the back of the buildings, there were far more lights than that, and there aren't that many number of doors back there. So I think that really needs to be revisited because, Bedminster there isn't a building like that in town. I think it would stand out.
So what about the intensity?
Well, it's the intensity on the ground probably complies with the amount of light that hits the side of the building and is reflected off the side of the building, which can't be calculated, but is a visual impact when you see it. That's what the problem is. Light isn't all about measuring the foot candles. It's more than that. That's the problem with the bollards. The bollards all have a source that you will see. There's 3 different bollard details in the drawings, and all 3 of them, you're going to see the source. That's problematic. It doesn't comply with the ordinance. And the number of bollards that are around here, there's like 20 of them at that intersection. It's a lot. And the question is then, do you need the bollards at that intersection?
I think as I mentioned, we are going to reduce the number of bollards. So instead of having, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 bollards across here.
But why do you need more than 0?
We wanted to have some accent lighting at the intersection because given that this is a public space here, we wanted to give it a little bit of accent. But we could do that with 3 bollards, 3 completely lighted bollards.
Okay, you'll have to rethink that, and then we can look at it.
Is there a bollard that does only downlight?
Probably.
Like cap the LED?
There's pedestrian scale lighting that are not bollards that might be appropriate in there as well. There's different light that could be used.
Yes, these are the bollard type details that we're proposing on the project. And I think there was a discrepancy with one of them, as you mentioned, Paul, but we'll look at the details. Look at the source of the light.
Do they serve as a true barrier to a car? Are they a true bollard in terms of safety, or are they just ornamental?
They were more ornamental. They divided. They provided the visual division, right, but they weren't designed to stop a car like you would in a security type of setting.
You talked about your outside agency approvals. You need the TWA for phase 1 because
there was an existing TWA on the property, right?
And so you're increasing the flow, even though that additional flow is less than 8,000 gallons a day.
Right, for the whole project is less than 8,000. The new flow.
On the phasing plan, I had a comment in my report, and it goes to also your site removals plan. When you build phase 1, how do you get through the site?
Yeah, we're just gonna have to stage this work a little bit in here to just do this road work first, so that you can get through here and then remove the parking lot and then build the lot. So we'll have to take the phasing plan and just work out a staging plan prior to construction. Because we have to have access.
Right, you got to be able to get through the site.
I mean, there might be a portion where when we're doing this work for a day or two, we might not be able to get through there, but we'll make sure that you have access through the site for emergency vehicles.
Okay. Another comment I had on your phasing plan was that we know that the buffer to the Somerville Road properties is very important. And the sooner that berm goes in and the trees are planted, the sooner they get taller. I would suggest that you don't need a DOT or a DEP permit for that berm and the landscaping along there, and I think it should be part of phase 1.
I think with that, and I'm glad you brought this up because I forgot to mention in my direct testimony, we really would prefer not to touch anything in phase 2 until such time as ready to build it. Now, I understand going in and doing that landscaping, but if we were to go build that berm, we would have to remove the part of the existing berm, which is there today, and until we're ready to build that portion of the project, we felt that why take out any of the landscaping, why even touch it until we're ready to actually start work on it. There may be a way to phase the construction so the berm is built early on in phase 2 work, but we didn't want to go ahead and clear trees and vegetation that's there today to build a berm that may not be needed for a year or two. So that's why we really want to make that part of phase 2 in terms of that work.
But I think it should be at least the part of the very first construction in phase 2. So it gets done and then the trees are planted during the first growing season.
I think that makes sense. Because then you want to put the basin in down there as well early on before you even start your building pads or your parking lot work.
I don't want to go, I'm certainly not going to go point by point in my letter.
No.
The court reporter will have my head.
Yeah, right.
So is there anything in there that's a particular issue that you felt like you wanted to talk about, other than the ones that I brought up?
Now, you talked about site lighting. I'm just going to really quick, just go through, we talked about hours of illumination, resource conservation. Just bear with me for 1 second to make sure I didn't miss anything. I think that covers it. I mean, as far as the stormwater comments go, I mean, we would certainly work with your office, Paul, and you on addressing them all and make sure everything's in compliance with what needs to be done for the project. So certainly would work with you on that.
And this is a little bit extra for the board or for us to look at, because this is the first application you've seen where the new stormwater standards are in play, where it has to be analyzed for both the current year storm and the year 2100 storm. So there's a lot of stormwater storage.
With any loading dock areas, we've had a couple applicants prior to this say, oh, you know, we're only gonna have little truck stuff. You know, you can't control only having little truck stuff, there could be 18 loads done in it. But for the loading, no loading dock in the main building, no loading area or close trash to the other buildings, you don't see an issue with any of that?
Well, I think that the distance to the trash is an issue, but they've said that they're going to have on-site management that's going to haul this material from the buildings. It can't be stored outside the buildings except in the trash enclosure. So that's something that they have to manage.
Does that become a enforcement issue for the town all of a sudden? You know, because they're mentioning restaurants, you know, in either of those two buildings closer to 206, they're going to walk all the way across all that property to throw stuff out. It's going to end up just sitting outside. But there's no.
That's whether or not it's an issue is your call, not mine. You saw the same thing I did.
And no loading dock. It's not.
I am less concerned about the loading docks than I am the dumpsters and the loading areas, because the loading areas today are so transient and people are in and out all the time. You don't have those kinds of deliveries to office buildings like this. You just don't have it.
Well, for a certain square footage of floor area, is there any regulation in terms of the size of the dumpster or the amount of garbage that needs to be retained on property?
No, because it varies with the type of use and it varies with the numbers of pickup. If you look at a bank, the bank will tell you they don't need any outside trash because it's all secure material that has to be shredded and hauled away. They never bring it outside.
Frank, did you have anything you want to?
Not with regard to what the problem said.
Yeah, okay. All right.
Let me echo, I think the point that was made about the dumpsters. Clearly, if you're gonna have food uses, you want the trash removal to be as short a travel distance as possible. Really, you want it essentially outside the building. Which, you know, I don't know if we've been told those are definitely restaurants, one or both of those buildings. But if they're gonna be, there's probably a combination. And the concern that Paul raised about how the parking is heavy on the north end and very heavy on the south end, that's a reasonable consideration.
Yeah, and my point there was not that you should overpark the property, but don't assume that the bank parking won't be needed. Because even after it goes in, they may find that the uses down there just simply need more parking.
Yeah, I agree.
But in typical bank parking, that's within your discretion.
Right. Or theirs.
Or theirs, but certainly within, you have that option even if they say it's necessary.
And that
bank parking in approvals, it's at the discretion of the township.
and that's why it has to be fully detailed out so it can be constructed as Tower changes the landscape plan.
But it's also important to realize that when you're gonna have parking show up late, it's great if it's right next to the building, like these bank spaces on Citizen Manor, stuff over 4 years.
Anybody else on board?
I assume we're gonna get testimony from ownership about potential tenants and management and at some point.
We had not planned on that, but if you have specific questions regarding those kinds of issues, we can certainly bring someone from ownership to testify.
Okay, no new testimony after 10 o'clock. I'm going to now open it up to the public.
One second, I have to unmute everybody, and then everyone is going to have to one
Raise
at a
their hand.
time,
Yeah, one
unmute
at a time.
themselves.
Well, we also have, folks here.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, there are folks here.
We have folks here.
Too busy.
I get
Okay, I'll open it up to the public. Have any questions for our witness?
Come on, Phil.
Come on.
You gotta come forward.
Come on up, come on up.
You gotta come
Janine, do
forward
you
and
wanna
speak
give them
into a
that
mic.
We're all neighbors.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we need a microphone.
Yeah. Do we need to move the lectern?
Yeah, stay right there.
Okay.
Sorry.
That's
Yeah,
okay.
mic doesn't go.
Please raise your
Okay.
right hand.
These are questions.
I know, but it never works. You swear affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. And please state your name and address.
Okay, Kelly Vakovic, 121 Somerville Road, Bedminster,
Kelly, how do you spell your last name?
Rakovic.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
Okay, so some of our concerns as being residents in the area, like ours is lot 18 in that section. Some of our concerns are that, we had spoken about how important having a 100-foot natural buffer is between our yards and the construction project. So I just wanted to verify, because I first interpreted it that you're asking for a variance to have it reduced from 100 to 42 feet. So I just wanted to double check if it is in fact staying at 100 feet or where it would border on our properties of ourself and our neighbors on Somerville Road in that section where lot 18 is. Okay. Okay.
Just for reference purposes.
Okay.
On the screen. So these are I'll say the narrower lots, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. These are the 5 home sites that are shown across here.
Right.
One of yours is 18 right in the middle. So
Okay.
just keep that in mind and go back to the other one. So
Okay.
we were asking for relief for the buffer from, see this yellow line right here?
Mm-hmm.
This way on the because those are properties that are owned by the applicant.
Okay.
So for these 5 properties here, we were maintaining 100 foot. There's 50 feet of existing vegetation that's untouched, and then there's another 30 feet of planted buffer, and then we have a landscape area in between there, which meets the ordinance requirements. But we're not putting any buildings or parking structure or anything in that 100 foot zone. That's behind these properties here.
And then my other concern was in that area, the trees that are currently there, would they be remaining, and also would like dense evergreens and, planting, because I was concerned that you're saying that you're not going to replace a 1/7 of the trees, like instead of replacing like close to 1,500, you were saying you wanted to replace just like 200 trees. The concern that we have is right now having the charm of the historic district and that natural buffer. If that's removed, or if the landscaping is mostly grass and some small trees and it's changed a lot, is that we would see Route 206 much more clearly. It would be, noisy, our safety and security and privacy would be at stake, because now you have these, like you're saying, like tractor trailers or delivery trucks could be coming, or more traffic coming off 206 already. And then we could have with a dumpster, like bears, raccoons, like different animals, more traffic. And if we don't have like a privacy fence, let's say, that would be protecting us and the residents around us from that as like a barrier, it's having some type of like high fence, and also the 100-foot natural buffer, having like evergreens, tall trees that go low to the ground and high and that are close together, just so that it maintains that historic, like natural like view and feel and the privacy and security and safety, those are some of our main concerns.
I think to your point, we are keeping.
Speak into the microphone.
The first 50 feet is going to stay natural vegetation. So what's there today, what you see right at your property line, that's not changing.
Okay.
So that first 50 feet is going to stay natural. And I think there are some large trees in there, and we surveyed them. There's also a lot of underbrush and growth as well. That's going to stay. Now, some of that probably dies off in the wintertime, but that's going to stay. And then we're going to add in this landscape buffer here, which, as I mentioned, is going to be about 4 feet above grade of dirt that we're going to mound up. And then we're going to have evergreens and deciduous trees and shrub massing on that berm. So we have shrubs for low, evergreens for the mid heights, 8 to 10 feet planted when we build it. They're going to grow over time, and then larger deciduous trees for the upper portion. So it's going to fill itself back in the short term once it's planted, because we have this dense massing of vegetation here. But that first 50 feet is going to stay as it is. And then the other 40, 50, we're going to have plantings and such on the berm there.
And then by moving the berm too, I know we talked about the water runoff. The concern would be like now with that berm, it seems like that also protects our residential homes and our yards from, because over the years or before we moved in, and even currently, if there's a lot of rain, it does tend to collect in our yards, be a concern for our basements and flooding. And so if the berm is moved and some of the trees have already been taken out with some of the water testing and things that have been done, our concern is that going to make the problem more of a concern for us? And also when we were talking about the water retention basin, is that what's going to be basically like on the other side of the buffer from our backyard?
Right. This whole area back here is going to be a basin, because the rules require the basin, and we need to do it. We need it for the stormwater management. So a lot of that water that may have been going towards your properties, not all of it, but a lot of it, is going to get picked up by that basin now and discharged into the state stormwater system. So it's going to reduce some runoff to the property line. Is it going to eliminate it altogether? Probably not, because there's still a 50-foot, 60-foot area of land that's still going to go that way. It's going to still be wooded and vegetated, but we're going to pick up a lot of that water and intercept it. Just give me 1 second. I have to get a battery charger.
Okay.
Sure. I'm going to try to do this without elbows. You take out the whole meeting with one.
Because we've done it.
Yep. Oh boy, I'm so sure. I know you'll move the table first.
He needs a left-handed plug.
Rob, on following up on Mrs. Rankovic's comment, and also coming back to Paul's earlier comment about deferring the construction of the berm, it's almost a trade-off, right? Do you clear the land that you don't want to disturb as part of the earlier phase, but at the same time, you are getting the berm constructed sooner, you're allowing the pines, the evergreens that you would be planting on that berm a year or two of growth. That seems that it might also address some of the concerns about getting that basin constructed. So from that timing element of getting the berm and the vegetation in sooner, what are your thoughts? I mean, when you're saying, our position is we want to push that off until we are fully committed to phase 2, or is that something that could be done earlier, other than advancing the expense? What other objections are there to getting that berm, the basin, and the vegetation earlier?
I can tell you the problem with the basement is that it needs the DOT permit to discharge. It doesn't impact the berm, but it impacts the basement.
Well, doesn't the berm, how do you do the, if you construct the berm, then you're creating a pond? You don't.
The problem with constructing the berm is I need the dirt probably from the basin to construct the berm. I need the excavation. I'm not gonna have enough excess soil from phase one to build a berm. I'm gonna have some excess soil, but it's not gonna be enough to construct the whole berm. And again, then, you're also altering the drainage pattern. As to Paul's point, I do have to tie it into the DOT drainage pipe. So now I'm gonna be cutting down trees and constructing that at an earlier stage where I need that permit to do that, so I think it's to a certain extent, it is a little bit of a trade-off, but it really would, the best way to do it, I think, would be to build it early on in phase two. Get it in there and have it so that it gets that initial growing season or two while you're building the retail buildings and everything else. And then it's dealt with as part of the permitting for that.
And all your water and your drainage from phase one does not affect this area?
No, it does not.
Sorry, Ms.
Okay.
Ray. Please keep going.
No, thanks. I was wondering the same things. And also, I was wondering if you're saying that when you make the basin, you're taking down more trees. I thought you were saying that you're not going to take any more trees down that are currently in that natural buffer area. So that's just our concern, because now that at least will block us from, like, when the construction's going on, whatever trees we have left, because already when they were taken down to do the water testing, like, we see 206 much more. There's actually even a access way now that was from a truck going in that makes us feel that it's not as safe as it used to be, because the trees, not only is it like it's for the view and safety and security and privacy, but even off 206, if a car were to run over, like, or a tractor trailer were to go off, what protected our backyards were the tall, sturdy trees that have been there, and that there was no direct route from 206 to, like, go off into our yards. So again, I think there's a lot of reasons why we would like to keep as many, trees and have as many trees replanted and have existing trees stay, because it all provides safety, and security and privacy for our yards. And so as long as as much of the trees as we can keep and also replant, like, as many as the ordinance originally said, and maintain it so that it's like a screen, because, right, part of the reason we love the neighborhood in Bedminster and the historic district is you have that privacy from 206. And our concern is anywhere along there, if any more trees are taken down or not replanted as is, we already can see, much more of 206 than we used to. We feel like it's easier to access, and then especially now with more trucks and tractor trailers, delivery trucks, the people going in and out, there will be restaurants later at night. It's like our whole privacy and our whole security when we don't have, like, a screen in that buffer in between, and also possibly a fence. Like, I don't know how, like a fence would come into play, but like a privacy fence for animals and people, and just all these different reasons. We don't know if that's part of the plan as well, like a fence and a natural buffer, so that it screens. And even people driving down some of the road, part of the character and charm of the town is seeing the trees in the background. If you see, like, 206 in the background, or like a parking lots and all these other things, it just feels like it's just like losing something that all of us really, I feel like, have loved about the town. And, having that privacy and security in between what Advance has there now and our yards has been great. But now that it's starting to be teared down in parts of it, it's really changing things.
Can I respond?
Yes, please,
If
right.
I could, I think it's important, maybe you didn't quite understand exactly what was being said, but this strip of trees that's half of the 100 feet, that's natural. When you look out your window, whatever is right there across your property line is still gonna be there.
Right.
On the property that you don't own, 50 feet of property is not even being used to provide you the first half of that buffer. The next 30 feet is being developed with a 4-foot high berm and stuff planted on top of it, which is gonna screen you better from Route 206 than what you see through the winter, through the woods in the wintertime. So,
Yeah.
and the berm is also gonna trap water in a way where some of the drainage you had a problem with is gonna end up stuck on this side of that hill. They're gonna build a hill here. So all of the things that are happening here, they're not gonna be the same trees you've been looking at, but they're not gonna be a wide open view of Route 206, they're gonna be just the opposite. In fact, if you go up and look at the portion of the berm that's already built, which you can easily see just by driving inside the project, look at how high that is, look at what's growing on top of it, and I think you get a really good feeling of why I'm saying, I don't think you're gonna be exposed to what you're afraid of. I think this is a really responsible treatment for any neighbor on that side, that there are 5 of you that are all gonna be affected by this, but, you know, giving away 50 feet of property, valuable property in a zone like this to protect these neighbors is quite an effort on the part of you. It's lucky
Well,
that it's not my job
that's,
out there.
we zoned for it.
Yes.
Just to be clear,
Yeah.
Well, that's
we
true.
zoned for it.
Right.
Yeah,
So-
and
so
that was our
essentially-
concern, because originally, so it is gonna remain 100 feet though, right? It's not taken
Yes,
down.
100 feet. That includes the first 50 feet that stays existing wooded, and the next 50 feet that's partly this grass area, and partly this planted berm.
Okay, and then like, I mean, if it's something we don't have, I mean, it's just an idea. I just didn't also know how everyone felt about a possible fence in addition to that, but that's
There wouldn't
just.
typically be a fence in that kind of an arrangement. The landscape treatment is trying to make it look more
It's
natural.
sufficient, right? I mean, like, if you're saying that you feel it's sufficient without
Well,
a fence.
You know, ultimately, it's board that's going
Right.
to decide that. What I'm recommending to you is
Yeah.
that it's the kind of treatment that's very professionally done in order to address exactly what you're concerned about.
Yeah, thanks for explaining. So, you know, that sounds good. I'm just wondering if anyone wants to consider also, like, if a fence in addition to that would be more protective, but that's just, you know, an idea. But anyhow, so thank you so much. I think those were my main questions. And then, and I had one more question about the bank parking spaces. I think at one point someone was saying, it was said that if for some reason they needed to, they would be possibly shifted down this way. Does that mean, like, I know the water basin would be there, but in any way would any extra parking spaces that we're not anticipating now could possibly be built into that 100-foot
No,
buffer,
no.
or that's not gonna happen?
We're not proposing that. It's
That's
not
part of
on the
what I
plans.
do to meet the ordinance required.
Okay,
But there'll be no bank parking here,
okay,
where the 100-foot, where the behind these lots.
okay. All right, thank you very much.
Anyone else?
very good.
Thank you.
Anyone else from the public? Yes, why not?
Yes.
No, in
Hello?
person.
We'll get to you next.
No.
Me?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Please, do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Please state your name and address and spell your last name.
Sharon Walsh, WALSH, 176 Somerville Road.
Thank you.
So, when and if construction should start, what is the duration of this first phase?
Phase 1, which is the office building,
Right.
is anticipated about a year.
About a year. And where are these construction vehicles going to enter the property?
And we haven't really gone through that yet with the construction, I'll say, mitigation measures or how we're gonna do with the contractors. But typically, 206 is the main entrance first. So they would probably come in there. I can't say that certain people wouldn't use the back entry drive. It's there.
Okay,
But-
because you know that's right across the street from the entrance to the school. You know that the school lineup starts about 8:15 to 9 o'clock.
Again,
So it's a 2-lane road.
I think just
Just
to that
saying.
point, I think to that point,
Right?
if
Hundreds of yards.
Okay.
there's someone who wants to
And
get to
at
the
3
site,
o'clock.
they're doing it.
Okay?
Oh, yeah, it's a big.
Plus, you're bringing big, heavy
true.
trucks and the load, and it's gonna compromise, I think, the weight and the pavement of these roads around here.
I think from a truck perspective, for construction access, if that road is backed up in the morning at 3 o'clock, I think they're gonna go the other way, not wanna sit in that traffic. That's up to the guy driving the truck, but we can certainly also work that out too with the developer's agreement.
You know, we
and-
have
and deal with
limited
that.
sidewalks on that strip of road. So it's going to impact pedestrian traffic, bicycles. Did we do a traffic study to see the impact of this?
We have an expert to testify on traffic next.
Okay, and my other question is, when you enter from Somerville Road, there are 3 houses. There's the old Cat's House, this Chandler Learning Center, Tudor, okay, then there's the plot, and then there's the farm.
I don't know how much I should say because they're covering most of.
Will any of those be impacted? Are they going to stay?
We're not touching any of those lots.
Okay.
Yeah, there's nothing proposed on those lots.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
False.
Thank you.
Anyone else from the public? Okay, you want to open it up to our Zoom friends?
Okay, so anyone on Zoom, you're gonna have to unmute yourself and tell us.
Hello?
Hello, sir. Please raise your right hand. You swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you God?
Is this the right? Oh, it's fine.
Janine, you get to pick one.
Well, then let's start with the one who's up top, which is Mr. Schundler.
Hello?
Yes,
Yes.
Mr. Sundler, please raise your right hand. You swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you God?
I do.
And please state your name and spell your last name.
Peter Schundler. The last name is Schundler.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
Good evening, Madam Chair and board members. I'm actually Kelly Rakovic's father. And they asked me if I could come to the meeting. I couldn't come to the meeting, but I wanted to be present. In part, if they missed saying something they wanted to say and so forth. I have to say, I think Kelly did a great job in covering almost all the points that she wanted to cover. There were just a few additional things I thought I would want to mention. First of all, I had a question. In that parking area, there are a couple of green islands, it looks like, but I was just curious as to what exactly those are. Those are these, there's like a green area that has parking lots around it, 2 green areas. What's the nature of those areas?
On the southern end.
On the southern end?
You're talking about this area here where my pointer is? Can you see that?
Yes, what is that going to be?
Just landscape lawn areas with some trees in them.
Uh-huh. And then I'm wondering, is there any plan to fence the area at all? Not that, I mean, the whole lot?
There was no fencing proposed on the project. There's some existing fencing out there now. I don't think it's screening fencing on the back of some of those residential lots. Not all of them are fenced. You see fence in, fence online. There's some fencing out there, but there was no proposed fencing that we were calling for on our project.
In other words, I think one of the concerns that Kelly expressed was the fact that with this parking lot, of course, now people are closer to the property. They can go through the wooded area and into the backyards of those houses and so forth. And so just from a security standpoint, it might seem appropriate to have a fence along the property, along that whole eastern property line there where it backs into residential areas. Seems to me it might even be good from the standpoint of the developer not to have traffic going the opposite direction onto the developed lot. Now, I should make sure that
Why don't you save that for the second phase?
All right.
Can I talk about the second phase later in particular?
Now, I'm sorry, my wife is asking me some things in the background here. I'll go through a few more questions ahead. So, what kind of security do they have what do they plan to have for the developed area? Do they have private security people who periodically will monitor the parking lot, or exactly what type of security do they plan to have?
We'll have to get back to you on that one and get an answer from our applicants on what they have out there for security.
And so, and as far as the fencing goes, you mentioned you had no plans, and I know there's some, I guess my wife was saying there's some question about that as to whether or not, you know, I have to confess, I don't know how all the residents feel there about having, seeing a fence in the back, even if it would provide additional security. But I'm just raising that as something that might want to be considered. And they might want to get input from the town on it as to whether or not they would want a fence there or not.
Mr. Reykjavik, you may not have heard, but our town planner, Mr. Banish, opined on that earlier.
And what was that? I didn't hear what that was.
He was not in favor of a fence.
He's not in favor. Okay. Now, I guess summarizing what Kelly said, which she said very well, is when they approved the change in the master plan, they talked about having this 100-foot planted buffer. Planted is a little bit ambiguous, but I thought, and I believe the other residents who were there thought that we were talking about a buffer that would essentially obscure the development, the parking lots, the buildings, and so forth, from the village side. And of course, it would also be a benefit for a professional office space, not to have the business people there looking into the backyards of these homes. So I'm wondering whether or not the town, as part of their requirement for this buffer, would be in fact that it would be so dense that it would obscure the parking lots and the buildings and so forth.
It's the ordinance.
I guess
It seems to me that would be the mutual advantage of everyone. As Kelly mentioned, you don't want people driving down 202 in the historic village area and looking back and seeing parking lots and dumpsters and buildings. By the same token, I suspect that the developers don't want the business people leasing property to have. They're trying to make it look professional and to be looking into the backyards of private homes.
Mr. Sundler, the questions have been asked and answered twice, and I think you must have missed the answers.
Well, I heard they were going to have trees and plants and I think the higher the berm and all that is good, but I guess ultimately the ultimate end should be that you can't see through it.
A very dense buffer being planted on top of a 4-foot berm. So I think if you have any more questions, please ask them.
We talked about the lighting, and it looks like the intention is to have lighting that is directed down. And I saw in the study that there was some discussion that these lights would not extend out onto any of the residential properties. But I'm wondering, I assume that they're also complying with any dark sky initiatives, and there won't be like a halo effect from this development.
Correct, the lights are downlighted. The lights are directed downward and those fixtures are dark sky compliant.
Right. And then I guess the final thing was alluded to in part about the increased traffic that will go onto 202, and whether there was any thought of possibly trying to restrict that traffic, particularly during the school opening and closing times, either by making it one way, one direction, or one way the other direction, depending on the time of the day or whatever.
So we defer that. We have a traffic expert who's going to testify. He has not done so yet.
So it seems like there were a lot of questions raised tonight, and there were a lot of answers that we were told we will get. It seems to me that it might be appropriate not to vote on anything tonight, to rather postpone that to some later time, to give people a chance to digest what's been said tonight, and what replies will be forthcoming on some of the questions that were raised.
Mr. Chandler, we have quite a few more witnesses to hear from before we can.
Well, I'm basically finished with what I would like to say. I want to thank the board for your service to the community. Without volunteers like you, we wouldn't be able to have the type of government we have. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chandler, and we agree that your daughter presented herself quite well.
I agree.
Okay.
Thank you, Callie.
Is there?
Thank you.
Yes, there is. It's shown on here as phone number 201-704-1500. You're gonna need to identify yourself for our attorney.
Dr. Joseph Stefano.
Joe, please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
And please spell your last name and give us your address.
DiStefano, Distefano, 115 Somerville Road, Bedminster.
Please go ahead.
Okay. I mean, I'm hearing a lot of the questions that are here, and it seems to me some of the answers, I'm looking at the amount of trees that are going to be taken down behind my residence. And we're talking about 200 and some odd trees, where 1,140 replacement trees, up to 1,140 replacement trees can be placed. And there's only 240 being placed, but yet mid 200s are being taken away, 5 to 12 inch trees. I understand that there's a 50-foot buffer of the existing foliage that's there, and another 50 feet, which they're looking to encroach upon from 50 to 42 feet on those bank parking spaces. And in the trash bin areas from 75 to 51 feet. Therefore, a berm or no berm, it sounds to me there's a lot more work that needs to be done here before any conclusion can be come to, because a berm of 4 feet, when it comes to lights, when it comes to noise from deliveries, when it comes to garbage disposal, if a bank is there, when it comes to paper shredding, those are loud things that are occurring. Garbage disposal at 7 o'clock in the morning, not fond of it. Water, impervious coverage, the amount of lot that's going to be there, how large is the catch basin, and how much water can it really take? There's a lot of things here that are kind of iffy as far as answers are concerned. I'm only getting, well, it'll be very nice, and we'll have a grass area, and we'll have foliage on the berm. The other question that came up was very, very good by the other fellow who was just on. And it came, and he brought up security. And security's big. We have people walking through lots of retail spaces now. And today things aren't as safe as they used to be. People are transient, people are coming in and out of the area. You don't know where they're from. These are retail spaces we're talking about. And lo and behold, you could also have a restaurant, which we'll get back to in a moment when it comes to garbage disposal in restaurants. Vermin come into the area also. So with no fence as far as safety is concerned, noise on the other hand and light, a fence isn't going to do a thing. Why wasn't a wall of some sort ever proposed rather than a 4-foot berm, which is not going to block any noise? Lights maybe, but the time they plant this and you only have a 4-foot berm, the noise is going to be tremendous compared to what it is right now. You got a lot more traffic coming in. Trucks, like you said, garbage disposal, deliveries, and if a bank is there, did you ever hear a paper shredder going off? A large truck? It's loud. So and besides the traffic coming in and out of the retail spaces.
Excuse me, do you have a question?
Well, I just, my feeling is those questions that have been answered so far are quite vague. Vague to the extent that I think we really need to revisit this or have some kind of more definite answers as to what really can be done beside what's being proposed here in a vague manner. Well, we're going to plant trees. Okay, you're going to plant 240 trees. You're also talking about doing wetland fill-in and bringing the DEP into it. Where is that wetland fill-in, by the way? Is that at the southern end?
Is there a question here that you'd like to have answered?
Yeah, I'd like to know how many trees. I guess there is a drawing there that I can't see because I'm on a phone right now. However, it sounds to me, how many trees are being planted? How are we assured that there's going to be a sense of security here if there's no fence or wall up? How are we going to be, assured that the noise levels are not more than they are now?
You're not. It doesn't work that way. It really does.
No. Okay, I don't see a question here specifically.
Well, there is a specific question. With what you're giving me now, how can you assure me that the noise levels with all the things that are going to be going on there are going to be controlled? Because a 4-foot berm is not going to do it, and a couple of trees are not going to do it, and shrubs.
Cross-examination.
You're adding to the noise level.
Excuse me. I don't hear a question here. We're going to move on and see if there's anyone else from the public that has a question.
Well, then I'll pose another question. Let's get back to the setbacks. You're talking about moving setbacks. Why is there a setback? They're asking for a variance from 75 to 51 feet on trash bin areas. Why?
We're asking for relief from the setback for the trash enclosure from the property line. That's a relief.
Okay.
Yes, correct.
From 71 to 51 feet.
75 to 51, plus or minus.
Okay. So that variance does that bring garbage disposal and truck noise even closer?
Well, you have to
the
look.
Residencies?
You have to look at where it is on site. I understand you can't see the visual, so there's portions of the property where we are bringing certain things closer, but those portions of the property are not by some of those residential homes that you were referring to.
Okay. And when it comes to the retail spaces, which are 1 story, my question is, they have basements. How high are those basement ceilings?
I'll defer that to the architect who can answer that question.
Okay. Because at a certain height, those are taxable. Is that correct?
Correct. Over a certain height, they become part of the floor area, but we're not proposing to do that here. I'll defer to the architect for the actual heights.
Okay. And the window well situation.
We have several other witnesses we have to hear from yet, and I'm sure you'll get your answers from these other witnesses as well. Okay, we're going to move on. Is there anyone else from the public that has a question? Seeing none, we'll close the public session. Okay, I guess we need to set a meeting date for your next, unless you have something else you want to discuss.
No, I think we've finished with Mr. Michello tonight. I'm not sure what the board's schedule is. We would request, if it's all possible, I know this is the first meeting, but if we could have a special meeting 2 weeks out or so, I know the applicant would certainly be appreciative of that. I wanted to kind of throw that out for the board's consideration.
Well, November 2nd is our next regular meeting.
Right.
Which is 3 weeks out.
3 weeks out.
Okay. What's your agenda like that evening?
It is wide open.
Yes, we don't have anything else right
Okay.
now. Yep.
All right.
Okay, so if you can make that meeting, that would be good. November 2nd.
We are available.
Thursday.
Our witnesses are all available?
Good.
Yes, we're available.
Good, very good.
So then we'd be carried until November 2nd at 7 PM here with no further notice to the public required, right, Mr.
That is
Collins?
absolutely correct. This matter will be carried without additional notices to November 2nd at 7 PM. And it will continue with the second witness.
Right.
First witness is completed.
Correct.
Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
George, come on up.
It's like, let's make it.
Come on down.
Let's make
Come
it
on down.
Make a deal.
Vanish
Is
to the
that
back.
down or up? I mean, he's got to step up.
Step up, around.
Price is right.
Price is right. Right, which is on every night now. They have nothing else to put up. The Price is right at night.
They could be very old.
Okay, is there anything from the board? Anything?
Well, you know,
Yes?
we do have this shiny award, Achievement in Planning Award, issued to the Township of Bedminster for the AT&T land use study that this board, the Township Committee, Somerset County, Walter Lane, obviously our partner in the planning study, so we were awarded, we, as in the Land Use Board and Township Committee, were awarded this from the New Jersey planning officials. Attending the ceremony was Chair Gutschall, Committeeman Hickey and I, and Walter Lane from Somerset County. And we thank everyone who was involved in the preparation of the AT&T land use study, which of course led to the drafting of the rezoning ordinance for that property, which we hope gets redeveloped soon. So thank you all who participated in that, especially this board.
She's gonna blow the whistle on you now, Mayor.
Even our professionals.
Wow. Where's this gonna be hung?
Larry's house.
Well done.
Very quiet.
Oh, you were right on that.
All right.
So unless anybody has
That's
anything
it.
else?
That's all I got.
That's all you got? Okay, that's enough. All right, do I hear a motion?
Motion to
You
adjourn.
adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Jeff,
Thank you.
Yep.
all in favor?
Yeah, done, yeah.
All in favor?
Oh, yeah. You can say not in favor, drag that back.
All right. Good job.